Hello, everybody. Welcome to Krystal, Kyle, and Friends. Obviously, it's a little different, as you could tell by looking on screen right now. So this
That's
is
right.
this is, I believe, only the second show out of I don't even know how many we've done so far where I'm not in studio physically with Krystal. And this time it's because we just did our trip to Austin, and I basically drove all around the U.S. and I got just a touch tired of driving 17,412 miles per week. So that plus it's my mother's birthday and I need to celebrate a little bit with her. So um, it's a shame, I got to be honest. I prefer being in studio there with you, Krystal. It's it gives the show a much nicer feel. I obviously enjoy your company very much as well. So it's a little bit different. But nonetheless, go ahead if you're going to
I was just
interject.
going to say, I do respect your commitment to your mom, though. So it's fine. It's all good.
I mean,
It's all good.
if you're
Only I get the glorious stone background, though, this week. So that's really
that's
your
true.
loss.
But I have the beautiful map behind me and it's multicolor. And so, listen, I'm not saying we should do a poll on it, but I sort of might edge out the stone just a touch. Um, but yeah, so anyway, we still have a great show for everybody. I'm pretty excited about our show today. We will
Yeah,
have
for sure.
Hasan Piker coming on, and he is just a colossal left wing Twitch streamer. And I've had the pleasure of watching him sort of evolve and grow. And from when he started doing it to where he is now, it's been incredible to watch. But there's also quite a bit of stuff going on in the world that Krystal and I have an eye for that we wanted to discuss with you folks for you folks. So Andrew Yang, we just got the news the other night that Andrew Yang apparently was told by Dave Chappelle, his campaign was told by Dave Chappelle, hey, I'm willing to do free comedy shows for you in order to try to get out the vote. Now, regardless of what you think of Dave Chappelle, and I happen to like him and I think he's awesome, but he is one of the top comedians in the world, if not the top comedian in the world. The guy's sort of a living legend with how Chappelle show went and how he sort of walked out on all this money and just went to Africa. And so he is phenomenally popular, out of this world popular. And apparently we heard that Andrew Yang's team basically said, no, he's too controversial. And I mean, this really gets to the heart of a big issue in politics, namely for a candidate like Andrew Yang, who was seen as this very authentic person. And before I interject and give my opinion, is there anything, Krystal, that you think about that you'd like to share with everybody?
Well, I mean, of course, this all comes in the context of the New York City mayoral primary, which was this week, which they haven't finished tallying up all the ranked choice stuff, but it looks like just the worst candidate possible. Eric Adams is set to win there, who ran this, explicitly sort of like corporate and pro police state campaign, but cloaked it in weaponized identity language. So any criticism of him was racist. Even he's taken this position of like, defending tenant rights is somehow racist and turns shilling for landlords into like a, pro minority stance. And Yang, I think both of us were pretty disappointed in the campaign that he ran for mayor in general, because we got the sense, even in the conversation that we had with him on this podcast, that he was listening way too much to these political consultant types, who, by the way, also noteworthy. I mean, these were like Michael Bloomberg's people and consultants. And it seemed like he just was relying way too heavily on them, like getting talking points for them, especially with regards to BDS and Israel-Palestine. So this is a perfect emblem of the type of ridiculously stupid advice that you will routinely get from the American political consultant class.
Now, to be clear, neither Krystal nor I endorsed Andrew Yang. There's a misconception out there that, her or I or both of
Oh,
us
really?
endorsed
People
Andrew
think
Yang.
that?
Oh yeah, it's, but even the way you just said it right there, like, oh, we were disappointed in the campaign. That makes it seem like we have a stake in the campaign. I have no stake in the campaign whatsoever. I don't live in New York City. I didn't vote in the election. If I was going to vote in the election, I probably wouldn't have put him first, especially after all that BDS bullshit. So just to be clear up front, neither one of us endorsed him, but nonetheless, we had him on the podcast. There were things we said that, hey, we enjoy this about you, whether it's UBI or drug legalization or decriminalization or whatever. But there were also things we went after him pretty aggressively for, like on Medicare for All and like on BDS. But to your point, I was talking about this the other day. so-called professional political strategists have ruined countless campaigns. And everybody has them. Anybody who runs for office has political strategists, campaign strategists. And, if I ever run for office, or if any of you ever run for office, let me give you a little piece of advice. You should only have policy advisors, and you should brag about the fact that you have 0 strategists, because they're totally useless. They're conventional wisdom humpers. I don't understand why you would pay somebody to tell you what they think other people believe and want to hear, instead of just telling people what you believe. And so I do think Andrew Yang is like a case study in somebody who was viewed as authentic, somebody who was viewed as honest, somebody who had a huge lead because of that and because of name recognition. And then keep it real, because he was overcoached, because he was listening to too many voices, because he lost his core, his campaign ended up imploding. He came in 4th, Krystal. 4th.
I think right now he has in the first choice ranking, he got like 12% of the vote. I mean, basically all he ended up with essentially was the Orthodox Jewish community that he pandered so hard to. In doing that, and I don't want to say it's just that, but essentially, like you said, losing his core and listening so much to these political consultants, he lost everybody else. And at the beginning of this race, he had a tremendous advantage because he had huge name ID. He had this kind of halo around him as being different and being kind of, coming at things from a genuine perspective, whether you agreed with every solution or not. You felt like this guy's an optimist. He's really telling me what he actually thinks. And so he might be a different direction from the city. But then once he just collapsed down to a normal politician, why are you going to pick the normal politician who has no experience in city politics versus like a normal politician who does have experience in city politics? So, I mean, I think you're right that there's just a lot of lessons to be learned from here. What made people respond to him during his presidential primary run, when, nobody knew his name before, media did everything to completely ignore him, and yet he was able to generate this like enthusiastic base that were super dedicated to him online. He was able to have an impact on the national conversation around direct cash aid and UBI. It was because people really had this like trust in him that he was just being straightforward and honest and his authentic self, even when that was like, there were some cringy moments. There were some moments where you're like, are you really supposed to say that? But when he got up on stage at the debates and was like, this is all a game, we're up here wearing makeup, like this is all theater, that actually really spoke to people. And then when he went to run in the New York City mayor's race and actually was like, okay, now I'm going to win. This time I'm going to do it for real. And I've got the money and the backing, and what can we get done? And he brings in the political consultants. It just ruined everything that was ever like unique and interesting about him. And he paid the price of the polls.
This is going to sound like I'm being a dick, but I'm saying it because I think it's true. Politics is not that complicated. It's really not. Like, when he was talking about UBI relentlessly, people were interested in him. Now, granted, he didn't do all that well in the presidential race, but listen, he came out of absolutely nowhere and was somehow early on in the conversation, which is, amazing in and of itself. But if he only talked about UBI the same way that he did when he was running for president, he probably would have held on to that lead and he probably would have won. Instead, he was overcoached. We went from UBI to like TikTok hype houses or something like that, to casinos, to a people's bank, which is an idea that actually is a good idea, but to, in the final days of the campaign, there was the story about he was saying things about homeless people that were really cringeworthy. And then he like sort of doubled down on those comments on homeless people. And one of the things that he liked doing throughout the campaign is just like going to random bodegas and random restaurants in New York City, and he'd eat something and then he'd do sort of like an advertisement for the various restaurants. And I mean, honestly, I do think that the biggest mess up was around BDS and was around the issue of Israel. I mean, he early on, everybody knew his position on circumcision. He basically said, listen, I'm against circumcision. I think it's genital mutilation. But hey, whatever, I'm in favor of everybody's freedom of choice to do whatever they want to do. However, this is what I think it is. I don't think circumcision is a good idea. And then you did get the sense, and you brought this up to his face, Krystal, that like everything that happened after that was just like a sad attempt to try to make up for the fact that he offended the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. And so that's why you got these like super hardcore far right-wing pro-Israeli statements. And even when they were, bombing women and children in Gaza, he like came out in favor of the Israeli government. And it all smelled so gross. It smelled so inauthentic. It smelled so overcoached. And eventually people saw through it. And the saddest part of it all, the psychopath ended up winning, And by the way, before we get off this topic, I do want to ask you, what do you make of this narrative that, everybody seems to think that the race was solely over policing now? What do you make of that narrative?
I think that's really simplistic. Look, I do think crime was an issue. If there's rising crime in the city, it's a real quality of life and safety issue. And I think that people genuinely do care about that. And I think you have to speak to that in a way that's direct and not like high level and theoretical and philosophical, et cetera, et cetera. But look, Eric Adams knew what lane he wanted to run in. He relentlessly ran in that lane. He weaponized identity and race in a way that, frankly, the mainstream Democratic Party has made themselves vulnerable to by embracing that rhetoric without any additional content or any class content around it. So you can have a guy who's coming in and literally making the case for landlords and couching that in the language of anti-racism. And that's landing with a certain percentage. But also, it's not like the left even really had a candidate in this race, right? The left shot themselves in the face 5 different ways in this campaign to where the final last hope of the quote unquote left was Maya Wiley, who's known for like going on MSNBC and trashing Bernie Sanders. She's such a great denizen of the left. So first you had Dianne Morales, who's essentially exposed as a fraud. I mean, she was a Andrew Cuomo voter over Cynthia Nixon. She was a big charter school supporter, and she clearly decided to run as a left-wing candidate because she thought that was a lane that was available. Then her staff tries to unionize, and they end up marching on her campaign. So that just sort of like, completely imploded. You had Scott Stringer,
fake allegations, yeah.
Yeah, so you have Scott Stringer, who is another like Hillary Clinton progressive, certainly not any representative of the Bernie left, but way better, let's be clear, than Eric Adams. And also on a personal note, when I ran for Congress back in 2010, on a personal level, he was very, very nice and kind to me at a time when not a lot of Democrats were particularly nice and kind to me. So I appreciate that on a personal level. Woman comes out, makes accusations against him of sexual harassment, sexual assault, accusations that now we learn she took to the New York Times. The New York Times could not corroborate and so did not run the story. She just goes ahead and does a press conference. The left, like organizations like Working Families Party and people like Jamal Bowman and other like left leaders, without doing any due diligence, just accept these claims at face value.
Always. It's
right.
Like
and now
fiddle. They get played like a fiddle.
After the fact, Ryan Grimm does the reporting when it's already too late. Not that long later, like a week later, he does the reporting saying there's this hole in the story, there's that hole in the story, there's this other inconsistency. We talked to the friends, we talked about to the people around him. And does anyone know for sure what happened here? No. But does it line up more closely with Scott Stringer's side of the story than hers? Yes. And the context here is important, too, because this was at a time when Stringer was rising in the polls. It wasn't Eric Adams who was surging then to challenge Yang. It was Scott Stringer. Progressives were coalescing around him. He was rising in the polls. These allegations, which appear to potentially, maybe probably, be completely phony, completely derailed him. So then the last best hope is Maya Wiley. AOC endorses her. There's an attempt at the very end. She did outperform expectations and is in second in the first choice ranking. There's a very small outside chance that she could overcome Eric Adams, but looks highly unlikely. So I think this idea that it was just narrowly about crime and it was a rejection of the left and all of that is silly, especially when you look upstate. You see at Buffalo, they just elected a socialist mayor. When you look down at Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, who's one of the top reformers, police reformers, and in the entire country, they thought they were going to be able to take him out. The police union backed a challenger to him, and he not only won, but dominated that race. So I just think I don't want to say that there's nothing to the narrative because I do think that crime ranks pretty high for New York City voters right now, and that's what they told pollsters. But to just say, oh, this is a rebuke of the left and this is about crime is just silly and simplistic.
Yeah, I mean, and I also just sort of reject this notion that the left is soft on crime. I mean, that's such like a caricature. So,
yeah.
The way I would discuss it is when it comes to things that I don't think should be crimes, yeah, I'm going to be soft on those because they shouldn't be crimes. So, like, all nonviolent drug offenses, are you kidding me? Free every single nonviolent drug offender in the country, legalize, tax, and regulate drugs, at the very least, decriminalize drugs. The whole point is, I don't think that's a crime, so it shouldn't be punished. But when you talk about things like murder or rape or assault or robbery, like, yeah, I'm tough on those crimes because I think they should be crimes. So, like, this notion that, like, well, the left is just soft on crime, as if, somebody who's a lefty is like, well, my grandma was murdered, but since I'm soft on crime, I'm going to go ahead and let them, get away with that. And, it's totally fine. It's like, what are you talking about? So, yes, I tend to agree with everything you said there. Now, go ahead and tell me, there's this other story. Normally, this isn't our beat, but we were both fascinated by this. Talk to me a little bit about what's going on with Britney Spears and
Okay.
How do you say the word? Conservatorship?
Conservatorship. So to be perfectly honest with you, it is my beat. I just don't talk about it that much publicly. I mean, look, I grew up with Britney. I love Britney. She's exactly my same age. And so I've been following all of this stuff. And basically, since she had kind of a, mental health challenge back in, I think it was 2008, her dad used that moment of breakdown, which is very common and totally understandable given the, level of fame and scrutiny and all of the ways that we know that screws people up. I mean, it's basically like capitalist exploitation, chewing up and spitting out these child stars. So she has this breakdown. Her dad uses it as an excuse to go to the court and take complete control of her life and her finances and everything. So there's been this whole Free Britney, I guess you could call it kind of a movement, but interest from her fan base and like, what the hell is actually going on here? And for the first time, Britney spoke out in court in a 20-some minute monologue about the treatment that she has received under her, father's guidance of this conservatorship. It's truly horrific. I mean, I think it's worse even than the sort of worst case scenario of what we expected. She's really been kept as like a prisoner, forced to work when she didn't want to. There's this, as a mom, this part really, really got to me. They forced her to have an IUD and she wanted to take it out and have a baby and they wouldn't let her. I'll just read you this part of the testimony because it just shows you how like shocking and abhorrent this treatment was. She says, I would like to progressively move forward and I want to have the real deal. I want to be able to get married and have a baby. I was told right now in the conservatorship, I'm not able to get married or have a baby. I have an IUD inside of myself right now so I don't get pregnant. I wanted to take the IUD out so I could start trying to have another baby, but the so-called team won't let me go to the doctor to take it out because they don't want me to have children, any more children. So basically, this is doing me way more harm than good. She also testified that they had drugged her with lithium that she didn't want to take. She has no control over her own money. They forced her to work these shows in Vegas that she didn't want to do, just completely taking advantage of her. And here's the other piece that really is shocking. Her lawyer, which she did not pick, she did not have the ability to pick her own counsel, has been billing her $10,000 a week for all these years to the tune of millions of dollars and never even advised her of her basic rights to file a petition to end this conservatorship. So everyone around her, from her dad and her family to this lawyer who's supposedly representing her interests, has been just sucking her dry, denying her just the very basic rights. And I know, Kyle, like a lot of people who may not be as into Britney as I am are like, whatever, she's a rich pop star, who really cares? But it's a window into the way that people who have any sort of mental health struggles can be abused and manipulated and exploited. Like if it can happen to Britney Spears, who was America's princess, what do you think is happening to normal people? So it really was pretty shocking to hear what she had to say.
Why was it so easy to get the conservatorship in the first place, and now it seems like nearly impossible to get out of it? Because we're over a decade now, right? Like 13 years or something with this?
13 years.
Why is it so hard? Why is it like? Why isn't it already the case that after the judge or whoever heard that testimony that they're like, okay, my decision's made, you're free?
Yeah, well, and I don't know what will come. Maybe that is what's going to happen now. And like, not a legal expert, so I'm not sure. But when they took her rights, it's just been very hard for her to be able to reclaim them. And I think part of it really maybe comes back to this lawyer that's supposedly her lawyer, who seems to be sort of like in on the deal. He's getting a giant paycheck from her and didn't even tell her that she could file a petition to end the conservatorship. So, one of the lines that her dad and his team have always used here is basically like, Britney's never requested she could file a petition with the court to end this, and she never has. Well, now we're learning she had never even been advised that that was a possibility. So I think that may be a big part of the story of why this has gone on as long as it has.
So did she, like, the question I have is, did she not even, like, she was on a TV show not that long ago, like a hit thing as a judge. I don't know the name of it because I don't really follow all that stuff closely. Yeah, and she's done a bunch of things. Did she not even want to do those things? Was she almost sort of forced every step along the way? Because I did see a documentary on this, and they talked about how when she started her Vegas tour or whatever the fuck, that they started the thing and she like walked out and then just kept walking and walked off. And it was like, basically it was a sign like, yeah, I'm here. I don't want to fucking be here. I don't want to fucking do this. Is it the case that like everything she's been doing for the past decade, she's basically like enslaved and doesn't want to do any of it and she's just forced to do it all?
Certainly seems to be what she's testifying to here. And in particular, she talks about the Vegas shows and that she was forced to work these long hours, 7 days a week with absolutely no break. She's also, been denied access to be able to see her kids. She talks about, these just really basic things. She's like, I just want to be able to go for a drive with my boyfriend in his car, and not allowed to do that. Where she goes, who she talks to, whether she's allowed to leave her house, no control over any of that or of her own money. So, yeah, it really looks like, and again, this is what she testified to, that all of the work that she's done over the past number of years, she's basically been forced against her will to do, which is, again, look, you may not, she's a rich pop star, and I saw a lot of people who were like, who really cares? But I just think that it's a window into how cruel this system is and the way that
how is she rich? If she can't control her own money, how is she rich?
Right.
How is she
I'm sure she lives in a very nice place, right? And so I guess that's the sentiment. But ultimately, yeah, she doesn't have control of any of her own money. She can't go on vacation, can't even go for a drive with her boyfriend in the car, and forced to work against her will, enriching all the people around her, including her dad, but unable to like enjoy the fruits of her own labor. So it's a story about total like end stage capitalist exploitation of someone that, should have been one of the most successful pop teen stars in American history, and has just been completely made miserable and effectively like enslaved by this system.
We should get her on the podcast. Her dad seems like a real piece of shit.
Amazing. Yeah. That would, oh my God, her dad seems, imagine doing that to your kid. Like, it's unconscionable, completely unconscionable.
Yeah, well, not to make too much of an abrupt transition here, but there's another story that caught your eye that you wanted to talk about, and I'll let you handle it from here.
Okay. Wait, did you read this story, Kyle?
No, I did not actually.
Okay. All right. So I'll break it down for you then. So
sure. Go ahead.
TNR had a profile on this guy whose name is Herb, E-R-B, Avor. And
stop it.
Unlike me, he was not given his weird-ass name. He chose that weird-ass name, whereas I was forced into it by my parents, who I'm very great. I actually love it. So anyway, I've embraced it. Anyway, moving on from me. This guy was the king of the, like, male sex enhancement pills that they sell at gas stations. His brand was called Stiff Nights. And so TNR did this whole profile of him. And the reason I thought it was first of all, it caught my interest because you and I had just been talking about these supplements. We read this book about like the patent medicine industry and the way that like the term snake oil salesman came to be, and how these things are still, even all these years later, really, really loosely regulated. And it turns out there was actually a law that was passed under the Clinton administration, no surprise, that made it much easier to sell these supplements with next to no regulation, where, you know, what they put as the ingredients on the bottle may be wildly different than what's actually in it, certainly not regulated the way that pharmaceuticals are. So coming into this story about this dude and his male sex enhancement pill empire, what I was kind of expecting was that it would be about what a charlatan he was, how the pills had absolutely no efficacy, like they don't work at all. It's all just, you know, a bunch of useless junk in the pills. But it actually, and that's why, you know, the government came after him, is because it doesn't work whatsoever. But it actually was the opposite. In fact, I think my reading of it is if the pills were useless and didn't work, he actually would have been fine. The problem was that the pills actually had some ingredient in it that was an analog to the active ingredient of Viagra or Cialis.
Yeah.
So they actually really worked. And the government shut him down because if you have our actual pharmaceuticals in the pills, well, then you have to be properly regulated as a pharmaceutical. So they shut it all down. But this guy's such a character. He truly has a burning, lifelong passion to find some kind of natural herb that will give men erections. Like, this is his life mission. Even now, after he's shut down by the government and can't sell his stiff nights anymore, he's still gone back to, like, now he's traveling around Africa again and sampling all these different products to see if he can find what is effectively his white whale of that herbal ingredient that is gonna give you that dream boner of your life. And so yeah, it was pretty fascinating. But one political part, to take it out of the realm of erections and boners, one political part that they talk about is just how few regulators they have for these supplements. So it's like, you know, the number of thousands of, I'm trying to find, here we go. The number of thousands of products that come through and how few regulators they have to actually evaluate them is insane. So while you talk, I'll find those numbers because they're in here.
Yeah, okay. So the first point is, I feel bad for this guy because the way that you get obsessed with that issue is to have the limpest dick in the world.
So he claims he doesn't have a problem. By the way,
ass cheeks, he doesn't have a problem.
I'm just putting it out there. His disclaimer, he says he has no issues. Go ahead.
Not buying it. The dude hasn't had a boner since 1972. That's why he keeps looking. I'm serious. That's why he keeps looking. Who the fuck else would be like, I have a real passion.
He wants to help people. He's got a passion for helping people, Kyle. I believe him.
Oh, please. There already is a thing out there that works for that. So I want to find a different one.
But he doesn't trust Big Pharma. That's the thing, is he doesn't trust Big Pharma. So that's where the passion comes from. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, there's a lot of stuff to say about this. So you brought up a book that we both read called The Attention Merchants. And in this book, there's a guy by the name of Samuel Hopkins Adams. And he looked at what was basically the early advertising industry. And there were endless wall-to-wall fake medicine supplements being sold. Now, at the time, people didn't really realize or know that these were fake supplements, so people would buy this stuff, and it was a multi-billion-dollar industry. Guys, it was so ridiculous that some people, and I'm not kidding about this, they would sell immortality pills. They would say, if you take this, you will live forever. And totally unregulated, insane, wild west type stuff. So there was this guy who was effectively an investigative journalist, muckraker. I think that's what they called him, muckraker. And he brought down this entire fake medicine industry. And he did it because he did a series of 11 exposés where he tested all of the things that they say are these amazing medicines. And basically, none of them worked. And in fact, when he tested them on like pigs or something, he gave the pigs anthrax and then gave them the immortality pills, and the immortality pills were supposed to make it so that wouldn't affect them. They died in like a day. Like, some people who took the pills actually died faster than the ones that didn't, because the stuff that was in the pills were horrendous and terrible, and he was able to prove all this stuff. So this guy was able to bring down an entire industry, but the media at the time was effectively siding with the fake medicine industry because they were the people who paid the media because they had ads in the papers at the time. So you go back and you hear about this and you're like, this is fucking crazy. This guy's a hero. His name is Samuel Hopkins Adams. He's a hero. We never learn about him. We never hear about him. And effectively, what you're talking about right now, Krystal, is a similar type thing where we have a guy who actually came up with something that works, but it was like Big Pharma and the government in collusion sort of pushed this thing down and banned it because it might cut into the profits of Big Pharma. So in some ways, it's like the opposite thing as what happened with the attention merchants. But to be clear, the overwhelming majority of these unregulated supplements are complete and utter horseshit. And so this is a rare example of one that actually worked and one that was good. But, you know, I think if you do have the numbers pulled up now on how few regulators there are and the stuff that's found.
Yeah, I do.
So
just 29 workers track 80,000 supplement products. Another 22 import investigators check just 0.16% of the 275 million packages entering each year. Their best guess is that 24,723,000 packages of illicit pharmaceuticals slipped through. And here's the other thing about some of what they're putting in these pills. Because again, it is kind of the opposite thing. I think if the pills just didn't work, they couldn't actually crack down on it. It would be legal. And that's in part because of the Clinton administration. They put the burden of proof on the FDA, and you can use this language that, you know, is very sort of like, as long as the language is general and weaselly enough, you can essentially get away with selling the pills that just don't work. The problem was that
your immune system. That's what they say. Instead of saying this will prevent you from getting X, Y, or Z, they say it boosts your immune system.
Right. Well, and that's why they call these like male enhancement or sex enhancement or something rather than like directly saying that this is going to treat ED, right? But yeah, so they say in this piece, the ingredient listings on the labels are so much garbage. One sex enhancement pill brand seized by the FDA had 31 times the prescription dose of tadalafil, I think is how you say it, the active ingredient in Cialis, and it had an antidepressant. Others had cocktails of as many as 6 different unapproved drugs or analogs. Others included dyes and filler like blue printer ink and drywall. And dietary supplements have been found to contain boric acid, floor wax, and rat poison. So you really have no idea what the hell you're getting here. It's interesting that because it worked and because it actually had drugs in it, that was what allowed them to crack down more easily.
Yeah, this is the same thing. There was a study that came out from the New York Attorney General, I believe. It was like probably in like 2015 or something like that. I remember covering it on Secular Talk. And they basically took these supplements, read the labels, and then tested what was actually in the pills. And in almost every single case, the thing that it said on the label wasn't in the pills. So it was like rice powder and all sorts of stuff. And the funny thing is, it's like even if the things had in the pills what it says on the bottle, even then a lot of this stuff doesn't work because there aren't efficient studies on the things that they say work. So even if it did have the stuff in there, it's an open question as to whether or not the stuff is going to work for what they pretend it works for. But it didn't even have the stuff in there. It had like rice powder and soy and like other shit. And this is what happens when you have a totally unregulated marketplace. You know, like this is what ends up happening is that these people are totally unscrupulous and they're just trying to make a buck and make it as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. And so in the overwhelming majority of cases, you're getting shit that doesn't work. It's very rare you find something that actually works.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually thinking about the supplement stuff when you were talking to Rogan in your podcast too, because he was telling you like you should supplement with this or that. And he's big into that whole thing. Like, is there any way to know that this particular brand or this particular supplement actually has the shit that it's supposed to? Is there any way to know?
Yeah, so like third-party testing, basically. You get an independent group to test it, and you know you pay them, so they're beholden to you and your interests. So you get a third-party group to test it, and also it is possible to get like pharmaceutical grade supplements, but they just have to actually be pharmaceutical grade supplements. And the reason why those are better is because pharmaceutical grade is regulated and tested. So, listen, we're not fans of big pharma over here, but I've said it a million times. Just because big pharma is corrupt and big pharma has bought the government and big pharma is terrible doesn't mean that antibiotics don't work. And doesn't mean that if you pop a Percocet after you get a surgery on your elbow that you're not going to feel better. You're going to fucking feel better. So, you just got to be objective about this stuff as much as possible.
Yeah, well, I was also thinking about, I think we talked on here about hand sanitizer and how it has like some shit in it that can give you cancer.
Yep.
Again, it's like all this stuff. Or I also covered the story about how baby food has high levels of all these different cadmium and mercury and arsenic and all of this like terrible toxic stuff in baby food that they've just also like cooked the books and looked the other way on.
Yeah, I saw your radar on that. That was phenomenal. And you're right. You're right about it. So I want to go ahead and bring in Hasan Piker now. I'm actually really excited for this. So he's a Twitch streamer. He's a political commentator. He previously worked for TYT. He worked as a columnist for Huffington Post as well. He's currently one of the most viewed and most subscribed to Twitch streamers, which is amazing.
Wow.
Here's Hasan Piker. All right, Hasan Piker, pleasure to talk to you, man. There's so much stuff that I want to ask you. So first of all, talk to me a little bit about your political ideology, your political awakening. Like, when did that stuff happen? Where did it come from? I know for myself and for Krystal, most of it was like probably the Iraq War was the biggest thing in our formative years. What was it for you?
I mean, I'm Turkish, so I grew up on the other side of the Iraq War in many ways. So I saw Islamophobia from America all around the world in the post 9/11 world. As a young Muslim boy, I saw authoritarianism in Turkey growing, the Erdogan regime. So I was always very political. And very progressive, I guess. So I had a couple different like awakenings. I was a bit of a edgy r/atheist, like Reddit atheist, as I call it. When I was a little bit younger, I think it was like third grade. That's when I went through my like.
Third grade, wow.
Yeah, that's impressive.
We had religion class. Yeah, we had religion class, but like they only taught Islam, and I was like, why are you guys only teaching Islam? Like, this is supposed to be like about all religions. I was just annoying. I was an annoying little kid, but that was like one of the first times where I started recognizing things, I guess, about organized religion. My opinion on that has changed throughout the time, obviously, but the Erdogan regime was super oppressive, super conservative. That didn't help. Very similar to Donald Trump in many respects. And I got to see how encroaching an authoritarian regime could be on the life of a growing boy. And then after that, I came to America, land of the free, home of the brave. I was duped by the capitalist marketing here. I thought this place was sick, you know what I mean? And then I realized, like, oh my God, it's not so sick. You literally need to pay an arm and a leg, basically, to go to the hospital. This is fucking nuts. So I think, like, anti-imperialism, anti-fascism, but then lastly, my journey towards democratic socialism, I would say, comes from our horrifying healthcare system here in the United States.
Well, and speaking of which, it's very nice of you to invite Senator Sanders to sit in on the podcast as well behind you.
He's back there. He's always watching.
I love that. Wait, how old were you when you moved to the U.S.?
I came to the United States when I was 18 years old to go to college here.
And so did you get in trouble when you were like that third grade kid being a pain in the ass in religion class? Like, did you get in trouble for that? What was the reaction from your teachers like?
One of my teachers gave me a 3 out of 5, like my religion teacher, because he just like hated me. I think that contributed more to me being like a edgy atheist back then. Because I just, I feel like kids are always anarchists. They have like a very anarchist slant. So I consider that to be an unjustifiable hierarchy, and I would routinely just like duke it out with them, or think that I was duking it out with them. I mean, it wasn't terrible. Like, he just gave me like a C, basically, functionally a C, a passing grade, but like the lowest one you can get.
it's funny you say that about the anarchist thing because Krystal was an authoritarian when she was younger, right? Krystal, is that fair to say? You wanted to listen to the authority as much as possible,
Oh,
correct?
I was very submissive to authority.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think both of you guys had that. I also think there's like a gender thing here too, where as a little girl in America, you're very rewarded for like making people happy and playing nice and whatever. But I was the teacher's pet, straight A student, like total pleaser. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm gonna figure out how to do it the best that I can. So yeah, I
Yeah.
was late to being a bit more rebellious, I guess.
I'm both of you actually. When I was younger, I was a lot more like what you're describing, Krystal. I was like, little goody two shoes authoritarian type, whatever authority says is right by definition. Then as soon as I realized that like grown-ups don't know what the fuck they're talking about anything, and that awakening for me was probably in like middle school. That's when the rebellion started. So I got a dash of both you in there. But so by the way, I had no idea, Hasan, that it was you were 18 when you moved to the U.S. I thought
Yeah.
it was a lot younger because you strike me as like in some ways like the quintessential American guy.
No, that's cultural imperialism, baby. I love I love American culture. I grew up with it. I consumed it like crazy. I like it's impossible to avoid it if you grow up in that part of the world regardless. But beyond that, my fascination was just overwhelming. I mean, I would consume American shows. I would read English books. You know what I mean? So that's part of the reason why cultural assimilation happened for me, and it was so easy for me to integrate as an American into America as a foreigner, I guess technically. Even though I do have citizenship, I'm an anchor baby.
I was gonna say your story is actually somewhat similar to your uncle Jank because I guess he came younger than you did to the United States, but it's still
And he
interesting
like
that there
lived
are
here.
parallels.
I I don't even know exactly when he came here. I'm forgetting now, but he was here after high school, like full blown. I
Yeah.
came to America after college.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, talk to me about your come up in the left commentator scene because I saw your entire career from beginning to now, and like
True.
you fucking exploded in popularity. When I look now, I'll see like your numbers on YouTube. I don't even know if you run those channels on YouTube. Like they're your clips channels. I don't know if you run it or somebody else runs it, but like the numbers are ridiculous. You get like 200, 300,000 views per video. It doesn't even matter what the hell you're talking about. So talk to me about your come up and what you attribute that to.
So first and foremost, a lot of the channels that you see, I only have one channel on YouTube. One
Mhm.
like full blown channel that I have is the verified one. It's the Hasanabi channel, right?
Right. Yeah.
YouTube.com/Hasanabi. Hopefully one day we'll reach 1 million subs. 690,000, I think, right now. But that is the channel that you probably see where I post like my I have two editors. Like we post political commentary for the most part there, but then there is what I like to call the Hasanabi Clips Industrial Complex,
Yes.
where
exactly.
where I have fan-made clip account because I'm streaming for sometimes 12 hours a day.
Right.
There's
Yep.
no
Mhm.
way that any human being could just like sit through 12 hours of content and like find the best parts and like cut it appropriately, and repackage it and repurpose it and make videos. So there are fan-run accounts all over YouTube, all over TikTok, everywhere for that matter, and they basically just clip stuff, post it. I am very open about like not caring about IP. I tell
Right.
them
Yeah.
go off Kings. I don't care. Do your thing, and I believe they make a pretty solid amount of money. I mean, I have clip channels that eclipse my original channel with some clips sometimes. They're so quick too. Like they will literally pump out a clip immediately as soon as I'm done talking about a subject, like while the stream is
Wow.
still going on. And yeah, some of them have like hundreds of thousands of subs and get views like, 200,000, 500,000 million. Like it's crazy.
Wow, you're a job creator. Congratulations.
I mean, literally. But the way I see it is like, it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah. Spreading your
they
stuff.
can
Sure.
Yeah.
it comes from It comes from just not wanting to like have any sort of like protective attitude over IP. Like, if these people want to make money off of it, like go ahead. I don't care. As long as
What
you
was
don't
it?
make me look like an asshole, I'm fine with it.
What was it about Twitch that was like, this is my thing? Or do you feel that way about it? Like, this is my format. This is what really I respond to.
The irony is, I originally got on Twitch because it wasn't my thing. I
Mm.
got on Twitch. I mean, in some ways, Twitch is definitely my thing. Obviously, I love gaming. I'm a gamer with a capital G, and I grew up in this space. I saw the space become really volatile, really angry and hostile towards marginalized people. I did not like that. I saw this space on the internet, especially, become like really reactionary. You guys know this already. A lot of these commentators thrive on that toxicity and made careers off of it, like Sargon of Akkad and whatnot. Right? There was like a radicalization pipeline, all that sort of stuff. I did not like that, and I wanted to change that. The real reason why I came on Twitch was twofold. One, because I wanted to show people that being a leftist and being a progressive does not necessarily mean being a joy kill or a woke scold or like a really boring, annoying person who just has completely lost the capability of laughing at things or making jokes. And also on top of that, I wanted to get better at public speaking. I was at the Young Turks. All of my videos were in front of a green screen and also pre-written. I wrote all of my scripts and I would read a
Mm.
teleprompter.
Mm.
And I was absolutely terrible at speaking off the cuff. Like I had these ideas, but I was having a really hard time communicating them. I was like, if I go on Twitch and I live stream for an extended period of time, no matter what happens, after a long enough time has passed, I will get better at being able to elaborate and carefully construct my arguments and talk to a larger audience.
You
Do
know,
do you think it
go.
was
I'm
just
sorry,
a
Krystal. Go ahead.
matter of like you needed the practice, or do you think it was a confidence thing? What do you think it was? That's really because that's really fascinating to me is that you like identified this weakness and you're like, I'm going to workshop it over here, and then the over here workshop turned into the thing.
Yeah. So I wanted a community for myself, and unfortunately, when I was working at TYT, like that was not. I didn't have a community for myself. I was still working at TYT, so everything I did was for TYT, and I was having a hard time to just go to a place every day and gather the troops, I guess, and be able to have back and forth conversations with members. Um, so that's certainly something I was looking for, and Twitch definitely provided that for me. Um, I wasn't able to do that at the Young Turks. I was just the Young Turks is Hasan. I had a show. I worked really hard at it, but ultimately they could just like turn around and be like, "Hey, you're going to now make this person also be on the show." Like it's nothing was mine. You know what I mean? And I felt that it's
Yeah.
called
How?
alienation from my labor.
Yeah. You and I have something in common because when I first started doing this full time, like late 2012, um, listen, when you start out doing this or when you start out doing like comedy, for example, no, you never have like an identity of your own, a presentation style of your own. You're always like sort of semi copying people who are successful in the field before you. And so one of the early on criticisms that I got, where there was definitely a big grain of truth in it, is that like Kyle's just a knockoff of like Cenk Uygur, or Kyle's just a knockoff of like Bill Maher. Gross, I know. But like I'm talking more presentation style more necessarily than the substance. And you know, I was sort of sensitive to that early on. Eventually I sort of outgrew whatever thing I was subconsciously holding on to in terms of presentation style. But I was sensitive to the criticism. Were you sensitive to the, oh, that's just Cenk's nephew? Were you sensitive to that criticism as well, or no?
Oh hell yeah, dude! I mean,
Yeah.
now I don't care because my work speaks for
Now you're not
itself.
Cenk's nephew anymore. That's not, people don't say that about you anymore. Now you're your own person, you know?
Yeah, people still try to say it, but it's pretty funny when they try to say it. I'm like,
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
like, oh, Cenk made you, like, or you're Cenk's nephew. It's like, all right, okay, yeah, he's.
But that's the thing. He actually didn't. Like you outgrew whatever the training wheels were because when you went to Twitch, like you said, it was all your own, and that's where you exploded.
Yeah, I needed like, look, I love Cenk. I think he is maybe too good for his own good. You know what I mean? He has a worldview. He's hard headed, but I think ultimately he means well, right? Um, but under the Young Turks, like I had all of these grand ideas that I constantly wanted to do, and it would just get shot down. Or sometimes when I did stuff, it was just like, yeah, that's not yours. We're gonna do whatever we want with that, and that's what happens when you work for someone else.
Yeah.
That's what happens. And no matter what I did, yeah, I definitely still had a chip on my shoulder about like everything I'm doing was a consequence of like Cenk allowing me to do it, or I got there because I was Cenk's nephew. So in a big way, like me branching out on my own was one of the best things that I could have ever done because it proved to everyone with eyes that no, I definitely did deserve to be in that position, and I worked very hard to be in that position behind the scenes, and that I could thrive on my own as well. So it's gone now. I don't really care about it anymore because again, my work
same.
speaks for itself, and I'm very confident about it. But back then, I certainly was worried that people were just constantly like, "Oh, dude, this is Cenk's nephew."
What does your brain feel like after a 12-hour Twitch stream?
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, honestly, I just shut off completely. Like I'm so on for the 10 hours, 12 hours that I'm live, and I'm looking at like, 30,000, 40,000 people are like speaking at me nonstop while I'm live. So like I have a back and forth conversation with them. There's like things going on. People want me to explain concepts to them, doing all that. So when all of that is shut off, it's like a moment of tranquility where I just feel like I can take a breath, and my brain literally shuts off. Like people will try to talk to me right after I stream, like right after I'm done streaming. Like my mom will just like literally tell me about her day or just like some other stuff, and I'm just like, I cannot. This is not. If you're telling me stuff, it is not going to my brain.
This does not compute.
Yeah.
Do you take anything to like stay up during that? Like, are you drinking coffee? Are you taking anything?
I'd be high as
keeps you
balls
going?
on Adderall, son. I would be so high off my ass cheeks.
No, I live off of a steady diet of nicotine gum and also coffee. Like I'm just cracked out on coffee and nicotine all the time.
Yeah, I would. Like I said, I'd be doing Adderall like nobody's business. So let's talk a little bit about like left media in general, and I mean the broad umbrella. So I'm talking about both streamers like yourself and Vosh, or people who do more like shows like a David Pakman or myself or Krystal. What are your criticisms of it? Because in my mind, I feel like one of the biggest problems for left independent new media is that a lot of the people have become too big for our own good. And so we've become like our own reality stars. And the content about us personally actually sometimes does a lot better than the content on specific policy issues. Is that a criticism that you share, or what are your criticisms of left new media?
No, I 100% agree with that. I stay out of like all the fucking Jimmy Dore drama or whatever the fuck's going on at any given moment. Like people will always come in and they're like, dude, what do you think about this? I'm like, no.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah, shut the fuck up. Like I look,
We're
I
all
would much
simpatico
rather
there.
yeah, I would much rather talk about, like literally using a pocket pussy than that. Which I do. I talk about a variety of different things. I just don't think that like leftist content creator drama is productive or interesting. I think it's like extremely nerdy, and it's one way that like people can still feel as though they're consuming political content while actually they're just like consuming drama content. So that's I would rather just do I would literally rather just watch 90 Day Fiance, which I do.
Yeah, then at least you're being like honest about what you're doing with your time,
exactly.
how you're spending your time. So
I think it's just more compelling. It's just more interesting. No.
Yeah, the personalities are more interesting, all of that. I mean, so you'll just literally tell your audience like I'm not wading into this because I think
Yeah.
I didn't come up in quite, the same way that you guys did, so I don't have quite the same like personal relationships with some of the personalities involved. So I think I get a little bit less pressure to like weigh in on this thing, in on that thing. But sometimes it's hard to resist and people feel like, why aren't you calling out this person or that person for doing this thing or that thing? Like, do you ever feel pressured in that way, or do you just tell your audience, no, I don't give a fuck, I'm not weighing in, we're going to talk about other things?
No, people try to pressure me about that stuff all the time. I think it's there is a feeling there's a feeling I have from the many years that I've been doing this where I think that like a lot of people thrive on feeling like they're the puppet master. You know what I mean? Because like there's so much interaction with the audience, the content creator itself,
Mm.
than ever before. So they feel as though like they can manufacture the interaction themselves, and some people thrive on that. So like, oh, Kyle had a bad take. You have to talk about this. It's like,
Mm.
no, I don't actually. I don't care.
Yeah.
And they do that as well, and that's like beyond the drama. I think that's just like, why won't you address this? Is this like weird need that people have? And it's like, I just make it very clear, like, yeah, I don't care. I'm not going to talk about it. Like, it's not that I'm like fearful that it's going to, cause a rift or anything like that. I just literally personally do not care. I would rather fill my mind up with like other kinds of junk food than that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it is junk food. And you're reminding me the one time I ended up involved in this sort of stuff was with Destiny. And, out of nowhere, him and I did a stream and we had a good time doing it. And then within like 2 or 3 months after it, he started taking these like super over the top, vicious shots at me. And you know me, Hasan. I don't care. If somebody wants to have policy disagreements with me and talk about the issues, I'm more than I don't care. I don't take that shit personally. Somebody could disagree with me on everything and we could still have like a cordial back and forth. He was like the one person who instantly made it super personal and super vicious and went like over the to call me Kyle dipshit Kalinske and he's a liar and he's a fraud and he's a this and he's a that. I'm like,
Yeah.
where the fuck did any of this come from? I never asked for
That's
this.
just
I
blood
was never
sport.
anything but nice to the guy.
That's just blood sports, and
Right.
the way to maintain an audience, if you grow up in like that debate lord space, is by being like the alpha debate lord, because like a lot of that audience thrives on blood sport, and they like you constantly have to maintain it, and you have to do like I guess uh authenticity checks basically, and you show how authentic you are by being like super fucking toxic, because for a lot of young men on the internet, like that's the only way they think things are authentic. Like you can't be,
Mm.
you're a nice person, you're obviously like you're hiding something. No one is a nice person.
Mm.
I'm not a nice person. My life is miserable, so everyone else is probably just as miserable as I am. And the only way that I feel like a content creator is like real is if they're being fucking an asshole. Which is ironic because I myself am an asshole in many ways. But that's part of the reason why like you have to constantly have these like back and forth arguments with all these people, and you have to constantly manufacture drama and chaos and thrive in it. And I think it's like, one, it's unsustainable. Two, it's very lonely. And three, it's just I think it's again unproductive. And the theory for change there is that like you're basically changing people's minds from I guess like being Nazi debate lords to being debate lords for whatever your personal ideology is in that given moment, which can change, and then your audience will follow you and change as well for that. I would much rather be cool and entertaining and have people watch me for that. And even if they come in originally to be like, yo, fuck this guy, I hate this guy, to be like, you know what? Maybe I was being an asshole. Like, this dude seems normal and nice. And maybe he's got some good ideas. Like, he just seems like he genuinely cares. I think that's my theory. That's my vision for change, and changing like spaces on the internet.
Yeah.
And I think that is that's one that both fosters growth and is, I think, more successful than just like constantly striving to be the intellectual gladiator to your audience that is like literally looking for blood at any given step.
I think that's actually a very insightful comment. Where do you think
Yeah.
that instinct and desire comes from among the audiences that are looking for that like blood sport and who can be the king of the assholes?
Well, I think it I think it originally stems from like reactionary commentary. I think like fascists, white supremacists, and like alt-right figures did a pretty good job of portraying themselves as like the logic and reasoning brigade when all that meant basically was just who can rationalize logical fallacies better,
Mm.
and faster, and who comes across as a victor in a debate.
So you think they sort of like created that demand versus there being like an organic demand there among the audience that then they met the need of?
I think there is an organic demand as well, certainly. I mean, people want to see their team win. It's basically like, it's like WWE, but
Yeah.
for nerds, for debate club nerds.
Yeah.
So there definitely was an audience for it too. Don't get me wrong. I want people to get out of that mindset though, and that expectation. I don't think it's good.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm not anti-conflict full stop. I just think the conflict needs to have context and perspective and the proper targets. So like when I used to watch Noam Chomsky lectures when I was younger, you go on YouTube and watch this hour-long thing. He's the only guy who makes monotone sound good. And like, who's he going after? He's going after the military-industrial complex, and he's going after Wall Street, and he's going after billionaires, and he's breaking down the way the system works. And it's like, yes, this is all substantive. But when, you see left commentators going after other left commentators, it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, have you lost all context and perspective as to what matters here?
I think I 100% agree with you. I think it's partially because it comes from a place of powerlessness. Because like it's in a way no different than the targeting campaigns that we see, that we've seen a lot more of under the Obama era and the Trump era as well, where like people will just be like, this unique individual right here, this individual right here has done an individual racist act. And some of those are incredibly warranted, right? But there are ones where it's just like absolutely ridiculous. And people hyper focus on those individual acts of aggression because they feel powerless in the face of these unshakable systems that have been created specifically for upholding and continuing capitalism in the way that it exists. So you can't focus on the structural inequalities. You can't change that. That is like far too comprehensive and virtually impossible. Like, what, we're gonna fucking vote for Joe Biden to like, defeat racism? That's not gonna happen, right?
Don't boo, vote, Hasan.
Yeah. So people will then focus their efforts on where they can make change, and where they can make change is, fucking brands that will concede to people that are upset about a microaggression, or brands that,
Right.
or the Colbert show said something that's like anti-Asian or whatever, and and like creating these sorts of campaigns feels good because, one, you show everybody else that like you're on the right side, your team is, and two, you feel like your team is winning. You're making like somewhat tangible change that you can immediately identify, and that's a lot more rewarding than failing to even take a piece of the police budget and reappropriate it to like social services and whatnot for the 10th year in a fucking row, and then have every Republican go, oh my God, look at the crime. Look at how much crime is happening right now. That's literally because of defund the police, as though we have successfully defunded the police anyway. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Crime
And
goes
there's
up
crime
everywhere.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they're like, defund the police is the problem.
Yeah. Even though we haven't defunded the police. So
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Do you see yourself as having like a particular goal or mission in what you're doing?
yeah, I do. I want to entertain people, and I want to educate them, and I want to do agitative propaganda. I want people to recognize that a lot of the problems that they experience stem from the current economic organization of the economy. That we are still significantly better off in our labor aristocracy in comparison to, like, a developing nation and a kid growing up in a developing nation. But ultimately, even with respect to like other wealthier individuals here in this country and the way that this system is designed, things could be significantly better, that we could have a lot more freedoms. Ultimately, I think it still revolves around like personal liberty and the pursuit of fulfilling endeavors. And we are unable to do that when we're shackled. And I think that people should understand that and people should recognize that. And that's what I choose to do. That's what I try to do as best as possible. And also have fun. I like to have fun.
It's interesting that you actually described what you do as like, I want to do propaganda, because I actually think that's uniquely honest, because everybody's got a perspective, everybody's got an opinion, everybody's trying to analyze the world, but in order to analyze the world, you have to do that through your own lens and your own filter. And everybody's filter, whether or not they think they have a bias, they have a bias. I'm not putting a negative or positive connotation on the word bias. I'm just objectively saying people have biases. So when you say, I want to do propaganda, basically you're just admitting the thing out loud that basically everybody in this space is doing to one extent or another.
Yeah. Gamers and neoliberals are very similar with in that respect. Like, so what I mean by that is this. Gamers think that, if you have a black female lead in a video game, that's political because the default position is the white male, right? Now, this is like real idpol stuff, but just stick with me on this. So anything that deviates beyond what the default position is inherently considered to be political because it's outside of what they are comfortable with and what they are used to, right? And then they will react to it and feel like, everything's getting SJW. Meanwhile, Call of Duty is like literally the most political franchise of all time, okay, backed by the Defense Department, actually engages in propaganda where like American war crimes are attributed to Russia, our enemy in the game, including the Highway of Hell, for those of you who don't know. Like these are war crimes so crazy that they've literally said like our enemies are doing that because these are such brutal actions. And that's not political because, you're not thinking about it. It's like the default character that you're playing and you're doing your murder and you're, doing your imperialism, which, by the way, I love Call of Duty. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, cancel Call of Duty or whatever. And that default position is neoliberalism, neoliberal capitalism in the United States of America. So most people that say I am unbiased, I'm looking at this from an unbiased place, are benefiting from having their biases correspond to the current economic organization and the current political structure that we exist under. There is no such thing as being unbiased, as you also pointed out. You can just say that because you agree with the outcomes of the system. And that's all it is. That's why you can get away with being like, I'm a centrist or I'm just unbiased here. I'm just looking at this from an unbiased point of view. Does that make sense? Or did I,
It totally makes sense. We were actually talking about something similar recently with regards to commercials. Like, I think Biden made that kind of dopey comment about, like, look at all the multiracial families they're putting in commercials or whatever. But you have this intense reaction against something like making a protagonist in a video game a black woman. And that intense reaction, that group of people pretends like it's the other side that's obsessed with identity when the reality is they're just as obsessed with identity.
Oh, yeah.
It's just that they're obsessed with, like, the standard, what the norm in America has been. Yeah. For the hundreds of years that we've been in existence. I was wondering, Hasan, do you think that because you didn't grow up in America, you're able more clearly to see sort of like that water, what the default position is, the water that we're all swimming in, that if you do grow up here, it's a little bit harder to separate yourself from the type of propaganda that we receive from the time that we're little kids?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, Americans cannot fathom how the rest of the world views them as like incredibly powerful bullies. Like the perspective is so different here. It's wild. Like Go anywhere else, and there are studies to back this up as well. Like, who do you think? What was that study conducted recently, or they do it every year? It was like, who do you think is the most destabilizing power on the planet? And like, it's almost always the United States of America.
It's
Like,
literally
yeah,
always the U.S., always by a
yeah,
mile.
it's always the U.S.
Yeah.
because everybody
Accurate.
knows, like, the United States is not the world police, or rather, they're the world police in the same way that, like, we or marginalized communities view the police as an occupying force. Yes, it's supposed to be there to protect and serve, and functionally, it's supposed to do that. And maybe sometimes it does do that, but like for the most part, it does not do that at all, and it's just bullying people and rolling over them, and you know, and doing whatever the fuck they have to get their own uh, to realize their own economic interests. So that's definitely contributed to me viewing the culture here in America in a completely different way. Yeah, absolutely. But it's social conditioning. I don't fault people too much unless they're like ignorant assholes. And even when they are faced with opposition and empirical evidence, they still turn around and go, "No, I don't care. Like, this deserved to happen." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
And it's interesting because they actually, my audio just got loud in my ears for a second. It's interesting because I saw the poll that you're referring to. Like, it was Gallup or Pew or one of the big respected polling companies that asked this question: who's the biggest threat to world peace? They did it in, like, I think the year was 2012 or 2013, around there. The answer was America by so much that they stopped asking the question from then on out. And that's really interesting. You wonder if somebody actually made a phone call and was like, we don't want to ask this question anymore, because it would have been America every single year. So they probably were like, okay, fine, we'll pull the plug on that. Hasan, what do you think of Biden's presidency so far? Talk a little bit about that.
it's fucking dog shit. I mean, it's literally what we expected. At first, I was surprised because the original rhetoric that I saw from Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, was like wild. They were like, "We're not repeating the mistakes of the ACA. We're not repeating the 2008 mistakes of the Obama, of the Obama campaign. These guys don't want to play ball with us. It doesn't matter. We're just gonna roll over them." And I love that. I was like, hell yeah, that's great. And then we started seeing like little symbolic victories in the form of like executive actions, like going back to one of the last things that Obama did, which was stop using private prisons of the federal system, which does not make up the majority regardless. But then when I noticed that there was a carve out for ICE and immigration detention, like, oh
Yep.
no. That
Yep.
was like the first time I was like, oh no, this is bad. And people were yelling at me saying, like, dude, you're so unreasonable, like, being ridiculous. And then we started seeing the manufactured crisis of like immigration come up again. And, the media was being as reactionary as they possibly could be, even though, they were so woke when Trump was president. It's crazy. And trying to push Biden more to the right on a lot of these issues. That wasn't good. And then what really solidified that this administration was not going to be even a subpar was the fight for the $15 minimum wage. Broadly popular, as you already know. Won the ballot measure to increase the minimum wage to $15 in Florida won, and it was more popular than both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So obviously, like, even Republicans want this, and yet they stopped fighting for it. They didn't want to change the Senate parliamentarian and totally said like, oh no, well, I guess rules are rules. Like, this can't be a part of the budget reconciliation. And that's when I was like, that's terrible. Even if you could not pass $15 minimum wage for one reason or the other, you should have tried to do it all the way to the finish line. They brought it to the finish line and then claimed that this did not impact the deficit, which is false. Like, it's verifiably false, very easily disproven, and went off the whims of the Senate parliamentarian and said, oh yeah, we just can't add this onto the bill. The real reason why they didn't want to do it, I think, was because they wanted to cape for the Maggie Hassans and the Kirsten Cinemas and the Joe Manchins on the Democratic side. I think that was the real reason. They knew that they were not going to get majority votes on that, and it was going to make them look bad. And that was, I think, the reason why they didn't push for it. But it was still terrible. Like Kamala could have overrode that. There were so many different things that they could have done, and they didn't do it. And that's when I realized, like, oh no, this is same old, like business as usual.
Well, and that was one of the hallmarks of the Obama era. And he still talks like this, as if politics is completely static. You can't possibly persuade or move anyone. So he's just like, well, I didn't have the votes, so I didn't even try. You know, we couldn't get the Employee Free Choice Act. We couldn't do a public option on health care. We didn't have the votes. So there's no recognition that people can be moved, politicians can be moved, or at the very least, as you're pointing out, $15 minimum wage, really popular, passed overwhelmingly in Florida, a state that Trump obviously won by, a pretty significant margin. So at the very least, if you are making yourself very publicly on the side of something that is incredibly popular, then maybe you're able to win an election and put some other politicians in office who are going to back you up on those priorities that are supported by the American people.
Yeah, no, I'm convinced the Democrats want to lose because like there are better ways of at least shaping the narrative that like Republicans are demons. Even if you don't care about like making positive change, why are you centering the conversation around Joe Manchin? Like, tell him to shut the fuck up, threaten him with like committee removals, right? And then reshift your effort, even if you know it's going to be a losing battle. Ultimately, refocus your efforts on the Republican Party and how they are obstructionists and how they don't want you to get $15 minimum wage. Like Trump's populism was, whether you like to admit it or not, very successful. And it literally changed, I think, a lot of these Republican hogs' minds on social safety nets. Or rather, it didn't change their minds, but they were already pretty positive on social safety nets. And they just, it was impossible to avoid in the media, that narrative. And yet we still somehow find our way to do it. Like Joe Manchin saying he doesn't want $15 minimum wage in Virginia is ridiculous when like the overwhelming majority of his constituents want it. So who are you working for? Well, we know who he's working for.
Yeah.
Fucking billionaires. But you know.
You made a great point that I never thought of, which is they, if they're not going to do the policy, at the very least, they could just like message a lot better and talk about the stuff as if they're really for it, to actually get people to think they're really for it and then blame the Republicans. But you're right, they're not even doing that. And the grossest trick that I've seen is the media trick where they try to describe Joe as like the new FDR, and they try to like pat the left on the back as if like, you guys have real influence now. And then we just get none of the things that would make him the new FDR and would make it so the left has influence. And that's like super disingenuous to me. And it's so sad that like people get this totally, incorrect picture of what's actually happening.
Yeah, no, it's Sean McElwee and like maybe the Pod Johns. They're the ones who have like, they're the ones who are like marginally, incrementally, maybe if at all, like a little bit more progressive than the average Rust Belt psychopathic vampire consultant, So
what do you make of, how do you explain two things? Number one, the improvement of Trump among Latino voters in particular. And then also, what do you make of, Kyle and I were talking about the New York City mayoral race, and final results aren't in, but it looks like Eric Adams is going to win, and he's going to win on the strength of basically working class Black and brown voters. What do you make of those developments?
With Trump, I mean, Trump winning Latino voters is understandable. I mean, he's macho. American politics has been a theater for charisma and like cultural issues for the longest time, like wedge issues that Republicans and Democrats both seek out to create like polarizations amongst the two parties when they are absolutely unified on a lot of issues, maybe marginally better on certain stuff. And is certainly better on the aesthetics of progress when it comes to like liberals versus conservatives, right?
And social
Republicans
issues,
versus
yeah.
yeah,
Social issues
social
too.
issues. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, but for that reason, like I think we've already conditioned the American voter base to just like only respond to cultural issues and vote for whoever is like the big macho dog if that's what you're into. So then, yeah, it makes sense that like the Latino voter base would respond positively to that as well. I mean, one of the key things that always blows my mind, that frustrates me so much, is that, and Republicans know this. If you look at like the Texas Republican Texas GOP initiatives, like with their outreach, they hyper focus on Catholicism and they hyper focus on culture issues and things like that. Why? Because Latinos as a demographic are very hard to pin down as like one big demographic. It's not like black people at all. Actually, black people are just unique as a demographic that you can do that for obvious reasons like slavery and the genocidal removal of all African descendants of slaves and their ethnic backgrounds and cultural identities, all that stuff. But with Latinos, there is one consistent thing that comes up in every poll. Yes, they are socially conservative, especially older Latinos I'm talking about. However, they respond incredibly positive to government initiatives. Like they will openly state that they want big government, which is like probably the worst way that you can ask that as a question is like, do you want a bigger government? Do you want big government? And Latinos overwhelmingly say yes, higher percentage than any other demographic group in this country. And this is consistent for younger Latino populations and older Latino populations. And Democrats refuse to hammer that point. They refuse to feed into that expectation that people have. And then they lose out on the culture war stuff. And that's precisely why Donald Trump improved that, and also a lot of misinformation networks that opened up basically on Facebook and whatnot that were reappropriated into just like getting Trump elected again and QAnon and all these other conspiracies, like in places like Florida, especially. So those were the reasons I think for your first question. Your second question, Eric Adams, like that entire pool was just, like that was dog shit. The New York mayoral race. It doesn't really matter.
Completely.
Is the New York mayor. Like Bill de Blasio is the most progressive mayor that we're going to see. And I mean, look at him. He's terrible. So
yeah, he wouldn't even endorse Bernie over Hillary.
That's what I mean.
Asshole.
Like,
yeah,
these guys they're always going to be terrible. It's New York. You're the New York mayor. You're the mayor of Wall Street. You're not the mayor of like actually New York City. Like, you command one of the largest armies on the planet, and you are working at the behest of real estate, Wall Street, like big developers and wealthy people, and that's it. Okay, that's your entire purpose. Is that it doesn't matter how progressive you are. Like, it doesn't matter if someone who was like claiming to be a socialist won in New York. I don't believe. Well, I guess technically Bill de Blasio literally did say that at some point. He said he's a democratic socialist at some point, but like,
did he?
Yeah, I think he brought it up once, and recently. But it doesn't matter because you're not the mayor of New York. You're the mayor of Wall Street and big corporations.
You know, I think it was Ross Barkin who did some really good coverage of the race, laid it out this way, which is basically like, I mean, New York used to have this history and legacy of these big sort of public works projects. I mean, you think of, public housing and those sorts of initiatives. Yeah. And then you had the bankruptcy. And ever since then, you've had, as you described, you're not really the mayor of the city, you're the mayor of Wall Street, and this aggressive implementation of a neoliberal agenda. And I think you're right that essentially the ship has almost sailed in terms of really turning things around and doing these big public works projects or taking a different approach to government whatsoever, which I just thought that was an interesting perspective. And de Blasio is a good case in point because he did position himself as that, like, more radical progressive vision, focusing on homelessness and issues like that. And yet, even there, first of all, you're so subject to the battles he had with Cuomo, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like the fundamental sort of governing reality of New York City is basically already set.
Yeah. it's you're just playing a role. You're a puppet. You're playing out your role. It's largely symbolic in the gentrifying project that is like development in Manhattan, and also the other 5 boroughs that are also gentrifying rapidly, so that wealthy people can live there at peace, and you push the poor people that used to live there away. You price out the unkempt, unwashed masses from the real estate market there, and then you just like kind of bully homeless people and push them to a corner. And same, like, you stop and frisk black people in the neighborhoods that they still live in that haven't been gentrified yet, and that's what you're doing as the New York mayor, no matter what. So of course they were going to vote for Eric Adams. Like, I mean, he's a really funny person, so I guess there's that. Like, it's just very weird. I don't know why every New York mayor has to be fucking weird. Like, they're literally all weirdos. Think about it. Like, you got Giuliani, you got Bloomberg, who's just a sick freak. You got Bill de Blasio, who's a gigantic loser and also very weird. And now you have Eric Adams. Like, he's great. Gonna be awesome.
Yeah. Krystal, to go back to the thing that you asked about the Latino community along the border in Texas and why they voted for Trump. Yeah, I think, Hasan, you're definitely right when you bring up the culture war stuff. And the other thing, and Krystal, I think it was you who told me this based off something you read. Some of them reported that just the checks, the original checks that had Trump's name on it, that they were like, he gave me a check and it had his name on it, so I'm going to vote for him. Right?
That's what they told to some journalists, is like, because you had a significant turnout jump of people who hadn't really voted in the past. So Democrats turned out, essentially the same numbers that they turned out under Hillary Clinton. The difference in why Trump improved so much is, number one, Republicans actually spent money and resources in the community just doing, like, whether their message was good, bad, or indifferent, doing the work of trying to reach voters and organize them. But yeah, there were a number of voters who told journalists, like, I got a check with his name on it, and it was super helpful, and that was important to me. So yeah, I'm voting for him.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you have that. That's the exact thing that we've talked about before, which is that it's unfortunately easy to change, to make people's focus more on the culture war. It's like, you're trying to explain something substantive or on an economic, and then it's just like, the equivalent of like, oh, squirrel runs by. It's like, oh, you could just get them to focus on things that definitely aren't as important and don't dominate their lives as much. And so when you have that mixed with like just a little bit of economic help, you could see how it can have some negative consequences with it. Krystal, I know you had some other policy stuff that you wanted to ask Hasan.
Yeah, so 2 things. I was wondering if you think, we were talking about the Biden administration and like their failures on $15 minimum wage. Do you think the criticisms of the squad and the sort of more leftist members of the House and the Senate has been justified, or do you think it's been too harsh?
I don't know what otherwise like anti-electoralist leftists like, I don't know what they expect from the squad beyond like, clippable moments like the ones that Ilhan Omar, who is incredibly fucking brave, gets to have, where she'll like, ask a normal question to Anthony Blinken, and then the entire reactionary media circuit will just like unload onto her and be like, this, Muslim woman wearing a hijab is actually an anti-Semite. I promise you, please believe us. But like beyond that, like, what are they supposed to do? I mean, look, I don't know where you guys even fall on the force to vote stuff when it was first happening.
Yeah. But
I said something along the lines of like, I wanted to force the vote on at least even the public option. Like, if we're going to symbolically push for something, well, I would have much rather had like someone who could potentially replace Pelosi, right? Without a replacement. It's like that is not even a hollow victory, it's a hollow defeat. And obviously that takes time, and like, you have to work through the party infrastructure to have your troops ready, basically, for that opportunity. But I wanted to push a public option, at least. Like, why are we not even talking about the public option now?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even want Medicare for all. I want a fully nationalized healthcare system. I think that is the best possible way. It's the most ethical way to go about it, and that's the best possible way to go about it. But I think Medicare for all was a good stepping stone towards that. Okay, like some form of comprehensive single-payer universal healthcare. But we're having a hard time expanding Medicare at this point. Like Medicare eligibility getting lowered to 55 is out of the question now. Now we're talking about like, or even lower than that. Like it's ridiculous to me that like we have this expectation that like the squad is going to be a bunch of magicians that somehow magically are able to craft legislation. I mean, they definitely mess up. I know, like, Kyle tracks them very closely, and
let me
you have
interject.
great suggestions always, but ultimately, like, I don't know what they're supposed to do.
So let me interject because I just want to break it down for you. So first, I want to separate some things out. There are criticisms that I think are totally illegitimate, and I think it undermines the cause of people who are going after the squad from the left. And the criticisms that I think are illegitimate is when anybody brings up something like corruption, or anybody brings up, they're just like Pelosi. If you can't see the difference between AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, and Pelosi, you're just dense. Like you're a sloppy, unnuanced thinker. And so that annoys me. And the other thing, the corruption thing annoys me because words have to have meaning, guys. And corruption means you're taking money from donors and you're doing the bidding of the donors. If you think that's the case with the Justice Democrats, you're just factually wrong. They're not taking money and they're not doing the bidding of donors. However, so those are the criticisms I think are totally illegitimate, and I wish everybody would stop making them because I don't think people understand how dumb they look when they make those criticisms. Okay? The criticisms that I think are legit are the following. So yes, when they tried to do force the vote over Medicare for all, they didn't lift a finger on that front and they didn't agree with it. Okay, fair enough. The response from AOC was interesting, though, because she said, I don't want to do it on Medicare for all because there's no chance of us passing Medicare for all. We have to keep our powder dry for something where it could actually work. And she brought up $15 minimum wage for that. Then the fight came up over $15 minimum wage, and they instantly folded, and they didn't do dick.
True.
And they had the ability to block all legislation and say, we're not voting for anything unless it has $15 minimum wage in there. Now, if they were to do that, the media would have rained holy hell on them. The Democratic leadership would have rained holy hell on them, and they would have said, you're in league with the Republicans, and you're obstructing and helping them. But if you had a spine and you knew how to fight, you could say, that's bullshit. I'm blocking this from the left. And if you want us to vote for it, it's not on me. It's on Biden. It's on Manchin. It's on the Senate Democrats who are against it. Put the $15 minimum wage in there. It polls at fucking 70% or whatever it polls at. Everybody wants this. There's even some polls where Republicans want it. So who are we kidding? We're fighting for the American people, and Democratic leadership isn't, and the Republicans aren't. And so they didn't fight on that. Where they're failing, it's a very simple answer. Here's where they're failing. They were sent there to do Tea Party tactics. They're not doing Tea Party tactics. They're fucking trying to play the inside game and like, if I'm nice to Pelosi and I'm nice to leadership, maybe they'll give me some crumbs of change and I'll like that. That's not going to fucking work. It's never worked, which is why we sent you there with the Tea Party idea in mind, because when the Tea Party did it, it fucking worked. They got a lot of their priorities because they made John Boehner fucking hate them just as much as the Tea Party Republicans hated the Democrats. They hated Republican leadership, and they shifted that Overton window to the right. As much as I love the Justice Democrats, and it breaks my heart to say it, they just haven't done the thing that we sent them there to do. So that would be like the substantive criticism of them. How do you respond to that?
I 100% agree with what you're saying. I think that I think that there is more that they could do as far as like utilizing their incredible media credentials. Like they're very good. They're savvy. Like they're really fucking savvy. They know how to use social media really well. They know how to utilize the media really well. I wish they would do more of that to at least like, to instill certain messages back to the American people, like to educate the American people as best as they possibly can by even in certain instances blocking legislation and looking like a bottleneck for progress for showcasing that like these are positions that we have as the left. So you are right on that. I think that they should be fighting harder on certain issues, especially like $15 minimum wage.
All I want is for them to fight as hard for things like $15 minimum wage as Josh Gottheimer will fight for like the SALT tax cap. You know, like
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, for
they're
sure.
willing to go so hard for like, we will not increase corporate tax rate, or we will not, we must have this tax cut for our rich constituents in our district. The right-wing Democrats are so willing to draw red lines that they actually stick to, and I just haven't seen that happen a single time from the left.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, think about the entire conversation around Joe Manchin. It's like part of it is because everybody loves to look at politics like it's a sport. So we analyze the districts and states. Like Joe Manchin is not supposed to be. There is not supposed to be a Democrat in West Virginia. It's plus 35 Trump state. You know what I mean? Like that's crazy that Joe Manchin is there. So we have to like sit there and have him play this song and dance to do his like own personal branding project. Same with Kirsten Sinema, but like Arizona's a little different now. But still, and I wish that like that conversation would not just shift over to AOC and Ilhan Omar because of their obstructionist positions in certain times, but also the reasons as to why they're engaging in this action. Because like when you ask Joe Manchin, like, why are you doing this? Like, why don't you want to increase minimum wage? Like, he has no fucking answers for that. So the conversation just ends at like Joe Manchin is an asshole, but we have to, we just have to, stand around and act like the main reason for why he's a Democrat is it goes beyond voting in, court appointments and judges. And that like he needs to be there for key votes, and these are key fucking votes that he's not there for. Like, I wish that we could have that same conversation around Ilhan Omar and AOC and all these other people, especially with respect to like why they're taking such actions.
Yeah,
and then have a conversation around the importance of increasing the minimum wage, even though that's going to create a whole separate battle around like misinformation and how like they're going to bastardize it no matter what happens. Like,
they already do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll vilify. I mean, they'll give Joe Manchin the benefit of the doubt. And this is part of the problem is like the media either intentionally or is just ignorant of actual politics in West Virginia. So they assume when Joe Manchin says West Virginians don't want, this voting rights bill, or West Virginians don't want to lift the minimum wage, or West Virginians don't want Medicare for all. They just take his word for it rather than actually understanding. I mean, the big part of the real reason Joe Manchin is able to win in West Virginia is more because he is, culturally conservative on things like guns, and he's very pro-coal, and he's very anti-abortion. When you poll on economic issues in West Virginia, he actually is very out of step with a lot of what the citizens want and definitely need.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you were to be like a culturally conservative, in the same way that like Joe Manchin is, but economically progressive person that's like running in an area like that, you would get obliterated. They would call you a racist.
I don't agree.
Sexist.
I don't agree on that.
No. I'm saying the media would obliterate you and never give you the same benefit of the doubt. No, I don't.
That's true.
I don't disagree on that people might like you. I'm talking about like people won't even have a chance to know you or get to know what your positions are because they would engage in the same thing that they did with Corbyn in the UK and with what they did to Bernie in the United States. Like they will literally just turn around and be like, this person is awful. This person is racist. This person is sexist. And if they are culturally conservative and they're like anti-abortion, then I mean, they probably are. They probably are misogynistic at the very least. Like you're literally trying to tell women that they should not have autonomy over their own bodies, right? But that same mentality of like, well, leftists can win in these areas never gets realized, partially because of the overwhelming media coverage on controversies and issues that they absolutely turn a blind eye to with someone like Joe Manchin.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The other thing, Hasan, that I don't even really want to ask you about, but I feel like I should ask you about is I think there was some criticism that you had of Sagar and I's appearance on Rogan. So since we did that whole section earlier about like leftists not fighting, let's get in a fight now. What did you... What was your issue with what we had to say there?
Look, I don't know Sagar like that, like as your co-host,
Yeah.
but I do think that, I mean, I think he's like a big Tucker Carlson fan, and I despise Tucker Carlson. I'm sorry. I think Tucker Carlson is a charlatan. He's a demagogue. He is absolutely a WASP nationalist. Like, and I think the imagery that he invokes, like this idealistic America that he talks about, is certainly one where immigrants are not welcome. I'm an anchor baby. So any guy that's going to be like, yeah, immigrants are unwashed and dirty and they're bringing disease, is not going to be right in my book. Okay.
Yeah.
So when I see people simp for Tucker Carlson, I'm like, no shot.
Did he
Especially
say
when
did
they're
he,
openly
did he send
conservative.
for Tucker? And I don't want to listen. I never want to speak for Sagar, but I can tell you, even in today's show, and this is Thursday that we're recording this, he literally said in the show today, Tucker Carlson is full of shit, because we were talking about this lawsuit that happened a while back where Fox News argued in order to get Tucker out of a defamation suit that no one should take what this guy says as true. So. Yeah. I'm not sure that I would say that your reading of Sagar is not accurate, at least at this point.
Well, he used to like him, Krystal. He used to like him.
Yeah.
He used to like him a lot.
Well, I think so. Yeah. So, and again, this is always uncomfortable when you're
reactionary towards China as well. Like the lab leak stuff. Here's what it is, okay? Because you guys were talking about the lab leak, and I think that's a theory, and that is not that sounds like a very credible theory, right? Mm-hmm. Because most people don't understand how zoonotic diseases are spread. So they're like, what the fuck, a bat and a pangolin? That's crazy. That sounds dumb. Whereas on the other hand, you have a lab, a Chinese lab in Wuhan, and it's a BSL-4 lab. And what if it leaked from there? And then immediately people latch on and tie other conspiracy theories that have already been disproven by the scientific community, genetic modifications, or the humans personally modifying this virus that it's actually technically a Chinese bioweapon or whatever. So there's a lot of stuff that has already been discussed over and over again. As far as the theory goes, as far as the lab leak theory goes, I don't have a problem with it. It's a theory, just like the natural
wet market,
theory, the natural
theory.
Spread
the
theory.
Zoonotic spread theory.
Neither of those theories are anything beyond theories. They are just speculations. This takes a long time. It takes around 12 years sometimes to figure out how a disease started, right? But what I don't like about Sagar's rhetoric, for example, with respect to China, is it'll literally be this is just like the WMDs in the Iraq War, and that the WMD in the Iraq War was a lie that the American government told to go to war with Iraq. So why would you then turn around and be and that's why we have to be super reactionary towards China? I'm like, what?
Well, but I think you're taking it further than where he takes it. And in fairness, he's way more interested in China and way more from a policy perspective hawkish towards China than I am.
Yeah.
Although he always is really clear to say I don't want a Cold War with China. I don't want to go to actual war with China. And also very clear to say the idea that this was some intentionally released bioweapon is foolish and not true at all. And in fact, the U.S. government was involved in funding some of the research that was going on in that lab. So if it did leak from the Wuhan lab, we are as sort of culpable and involved in this as anyone is. But I do think it's important to figure out how the pandemic started. And I also do think, yeah, and of course, and I also do think that it is an important media story because for so long, even though this was one plausible theory and the zoonotic origin is one plausible theory, I would say based on my, non-scientist reading of the evidence at this point, it's more plausible and there's more preponderance of evidence on the side of the lab leak theory. But this was completely dismissed by the media for a long time. It was always, this is debunked, this is discredited, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think it's an interesting window into the way that the media was able to get this really, really important question of how this thing started very wrong at the beginning of this.
But I don't even think it's like very wrong. Because again, they're both theories. The thing is, like, they certainly did not even lend any credence to the alternative, and part of that was because I assumed that they were operating in unison to make sure that there was no like additional agitation towards China, and any sort of like hawkish opinions towards China was seen as like a Trumpian thing to do, which is probably part of the reason why they immediately dismissed that. Um,
Yeah,
but
but don't you like, I see that as an issue though.
no, no,
That
no.
you have
I
that the
understand.
goal is like, we have this goal over here to oppose this politician. So rather than neutrally looking at what happened, we're going to take a side, even though both of these theories are still completely plausible.
Yeah, no, I do agree. I understand, and I think that the media is not truthful. Of course not. Ultimately, I think it's really interesting that like the media has now completely turned on the original theory that it could have been a lab leak, and is fully in support of it. Almost, it feels like, where like the
Yeah, well,
origination
Trump's
of the
gone,
lab leak
so
theory.
it's more comfortable now, right? That Trump's
Yeah,
gone.
but the originations of the lab leak theory actually still come from the State Department. Like, this was still a deliberate effort by the Trump administration to shift blame away and cast out and shift blame away from the actions, or rather the inaction at the time, that the American government was taking, back to like how this was a Chinese disease somehow in origin. Um, so I mean, this was literally what Mike Pompeo was going off and going off about, and Donald Trump was going off about at the time.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And,
No,
But guys,
we definitely don't disagree that there were a lot of bad actors who did not want to take accountability for the complete and utter, like, despicable failure of the U.S. response. But, I think that there's two important pieces. Number one, just like, we should know how the fuck this thing started. And by the way, that type of research, we already know that it is very common for viruses to escape the lab, whether it did in this case or not. So this research, we know, is very dangerous, and it's being, funded in large amounts around the world. So that piece is like really important, just from not having the next pandemic. But I also think the fact that it was like, that you had bad actors saying X, so we're just going to assume Y, is one of the reasons why you've had the media get played on a lot of these type of stories.
You guys mind if I jump in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
Kyle.
go ahead.
Okay, so there's a bunch of things to say. First of all, I feel like this needs to be said, because this is the part that's left out in like all conversations on this, but China didn't do it on purpose, even if there was a lab leak.
Yeah.
And like, unfortunately,
Yeah, we all agree with that.
I know you guys agree to that, but unfortunately, most people who hear these conversations, when they hear the lab leak, they think it was like on purpose and China wanted to like poison the world or something. And that's why it's really important to say that they didn't do it on purpose, even if lab leak is true. The other point is, both things can be true, that Trump and Pompeo and all this gaggle of idiots, they were trying to cover for the fact that they fucking responded horribly to COVID. And so they'd point the finger in any direction they possibly could. And it's a very easy thing to be like, China, lab leak, them, bad, 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 bad. So they used it as an excuse. But then it also can be the case that it probably is true that it came from that lab. I mean, it's weird that you have a lab to study bat coronaviruses, and then you get a bat coronavirus that gets around the entire world. So I think that that's the most likely scenario. And then the final point I want to make is, the issue now is that it's so politicized. So when you say something about this, people just assume like a whole wagon of assumptions go along with what you're saying. So like on the left, if you bring up the lab leak theory, people think that you want to use that for a new Cold War, and you want to use this to like ramp up tensions with China. And to be fair to the left, that is how it's going to fucking be used by the State Department and by people with power. But again, the unfortunate thing is it could be factually correct, and also we shouldn't use it for fuel for a new Cold War. And like on the right, as I already sort of alluded to, people will hang on to lab leak theory, and they'll do it specifically because they want to blame the Chinese, deflect blame away from Trump, and escalate. And so what we need to do is separate out the empirical question from what happened from the political assumptions that go along with it. Because in my opinion, the political assumptions are just dumb and wrong and shouldn't be brought along with the conversation on what empirically happened. But unfortunately, only people like us can have the conversation about what empirically happened without the assumptions, because people read so much into it when you talk about it. And finally, last thing I'll say is, I think, Krystal, you're right about Sagar, that his intentionality isn't like China bad, China bad, China bad, and like feeding some Cold War paranoia. But his obsession is really fucking weird, and it does sort of lead to that, whether or not he thinks it does.
Yeah. As far as like having a conversation of the origins of the league, obviously, like I'm fully in support of like trying to figure out how this virus happened, so that we can, maybe beef up BSL-4 lab security so like that this doesn't happen again. But as far as like America funded, gain of function research in China, like that still lends itself to the same argument that you're making originally. Like, this is not a nefarious, like, secret thing. Like, of course, that Anthony Fauci, as someone in the American government, is going to offer grants to virology institutes all around the world, on even gain of function research and research to figure out how these pathogens work, and to even eliminate new problems that new complications that may arise. Like I'm never going to be anti-scientific research. Like I don't think that we should like shut down even gain of function researchers research all around the world. I mean, I understand its dangers, but ultimately I feel like it's still very helpful in even immediately finding a vaccine, or immediately tackling deadly diseases in the future, and develop a better understanding of like how viruses mutate for the future. So
so you feel like even if the coronavirus pandemic did start because of gain of function research that escaped the lab, you still think that this research net is a benefit versus a danger?
Not this specific research, but like gain of function research in general. Yeah, I do. And I'll admit that I'm not like super well read on gain of function research in general. I have a broad understanding of it, much like many people in the media, and I still choose to side with the scientific community, even though it is like the ethics of gain of function research is still something that people discuss. I still am a believer that this sort of research is still important.
Well, I'm also not a scientist, but I will say that it's not like there's one scientific consensus around this. So there's a dispute in the scientific community whether this research is worth doing, right? Whether it's net benefit and helps us to understand how viruses can evolve and the ways. I mean, what gain of function means is making the virus more dangerous to see what happens, right? So there is a divide within the scientific community. It's not like there's one consensus where the scientists are saying, yay, gain of function, and like Trump is saying no, right?
I mean, guys, it would be a scientific experiment to try to clone a human being. Does that mean we should be like, hey, science says it's okay, so go ahead and try it? I feel like the ethics questions always come second to like the question of science, and
we can do it.
That's
right.
I mean, it was the same. The fucking nuclear weapon. That was like a scientific thing. They were like, what happens if we split the atom or whatever the fuck? And then they created nuclear bombs. I mean, I think now in retrospect we can look at that and say, probably a fucking mistake.
Probably not great.
Yeah, probably don't do that.
Yeah, the caveat that I was gonna have for that gain of function research is like to obviously ensure its safety above all, because leaks, as you pointed out, do happen, and it can be devastating. Ironically, similar to nukes, which America notoriously is not very careful with. And has used in the past.
We're the only ones who used it. We're the only ones.
Yeah, gain of function research can be devastating if the lab leak theory is true, and it's also gain of function research that mutated, or I guess like increased the like virality, or I guess like the transmissibility or host range of this virus. I still think that like the areas of improvement are not necessarily to just like shut down gain of function research altogether, but instead to improve the safety measures across the board throughout the entire, the entire scientific, like virology institution, scientific community, and that they
Certainly.
look at
I mean, one of the things that I learned about this is that it actually is very common for these viruses to escape the lab. And so it's not just like China didn't do a good job here and they have shitty labs or whatever. It's actually very, very common that the viruses in this gain of function research escape the lab. And the way that it's funny because Fauci and also
that's the same for every virus, right? Like it's not just gain of function research viruses that
right, but the thing with gain of function research though is that you're intentionally trying to make a virus more dangerous. So that's why when those viruses escape the lab, it's an inherently more dangerous situation because that's what it's all about. And Fauci and the doctor, I think she is her name, who runs that lab, they both say like we weren't doing gain of function research there. We were experimenting with how to get the virus to move from species to species, which seems also kind of like a dangerous thing to be doing. So anyway, a lot of questions here that all three of us non-scientists are probably not in the best position to thoroughly resolve.
I'm an expert. I don't know what you're talking about.
Just to work on bats, like for the record, I think that like, look, there's a reason why bats are the common animal in a lot of these in a lot of how these diseases spread, whether it be Ebola or any number of different diseases, and that's because they have a really fucked up metabolism, and they're perfect. They're perfect for transmitting this and like helping this disease jump or helping this disease mutate and jump from one animal to another, which is precisely why I understand why there would be research on that.
I think that's a very problematic anti-bat view that you hold there, Hasan.
Yeah, no, I'm
not going to stand for
Batman, and I do think that we should continue researching bats in that respect, especially. But the reason why I say this is because like this is a relatively new area still, and I think that there could be
it's transhumanist.
I guess I'm a bit of like a sci-fi nerd and transhumanist, but like I don't believe that we should be limiting science unless it's like a serious, significant ethical concern. And for genetic modification does not meet that criteria for me of like ethical concern. But that's my personal opinion on it. I would love to eliminate.
I just don't want another fucking pandemic. That's all.
No, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Devastating.
Hasan, you were telling us that you started a new podcast. Tell us about that.
Oh yeah, I have a new podcast called Fear and Malding, and my co-host is Will Neff, who just recently announced that he's going to be a host on the new TV project G4, and we talk about a variety of different things. We talk about politics. He's not super political, so we just like try to keep it light. I'll just like describe certain things to him from time to time, and then it's more so like comedy focused, just two guys having fun, shooting the shit, looking at the mania of the American news cycle for the most part.
And is that just in all the normal podcast places people can find that?
Yes, you can find that everywhere. Audible, Spotify, Apple, wherever you can get your podcast.
And everybody check out Hasan on Twitch. Everybody check him out on Twitter. All the normal places. He's gigantic now. It's kind of amazing how much you exploded in a way few people have, man.
Well, thank you. I mean, I just because I know life. I don't have anything else going on. That's all I do. I'm
that is
Krystal
life.
and I, on the other hand, have so much else going on.
Well, I have 3 kids, so I do have a lot of going on. Hasan, thank you so much. It's so great to finally get to chat with you.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a pleasure. Thank you for having me, guys.
All right, that's Hasan Piker. Really interesting guy. I've enjoyed seeing his evolution over the years because it is true, the thing I brought up to him, there was a time when it was like, you are Cenk's nephew. That's it. Like you would be nothing without Cenk. It's nepotism. You've been gifted a spot at TYT. And then like I said to him, when he left the Young Turks and started doing his Twitch thing full time, that is when he blew up. So really, in like the biggest and best and clearest way you could possibly do it, he has now made it so that he's his own man. And like, respect for that, because it's tough. I mean, when you're labeled up front as the nepotism guy, just like you're the nephew, it's tough. And I like I said, I could relate to him a little bit because when I first started, I was a ripoff stylistically of Bill Maher and Jank and some others. And like, it sticks with you when people are like, I see what you're fucking doing. You're just copying somebody. That's all you're doing. It's nothing. And then eventually you have to grow and become your own person and like try to make it as your own person. And, it's vicious out there sometimes online, and he found a way to grind through it. And listen, to when you're doing 10 to 12 hour streams like every day, Dad, you're working your ass off. I get it. It's a stream. It's not the same as you could be in a coal mine somewhere. That's a lot harder. Don't get me wrong. But like, that's a lot to do. And he's stuck to it. And, he's really blown up in a way that's amazing to see.
Cool to see anytime someone finds like their thing, like the format on TYT, it wasn't working when he felt restricted and he had all these ideas and he felt like he wasn't able to execute them. And then there's something profound about the fact that he decided to go over to Twitch because he actually felt like that would be a good place for him to practice, to get better, because he didn't feel like he was comfortable speaking off the cuff, that he wasn't that good at articulating his arguments. He wanted more practice. And going over there in a place that he felt was sort of like lower stakes, and I'm just going to workshop things here, and then I can take them on to the main stage over at TYT or on YouTube or whatever, that turned into the thing that he was like uniquely meant to do. And now it's all off the cuff, and that's what he's known for, is just like being totally in the flow and totally in the moment and reacting. So I think it's very interesting to me that was the way that it came about. It wasn't so much an intentional move like, I'm going to try this thing now, but it was actually, I see this need in my own personal development. I'm going to workshop it over here. And maybe because he felt that it was low stakes and it was just sort of like relaxed and easy and I'm just practicing, that he ended up having such an affinity for it and people responded so much to him.
What do you make of that format, the Twitch format versus what we do most of the time? The Twitch format being 100% live. You're basically learning along with the audience. Like you could pull up an article and start reading it, and your audience is reading along with you, and so you're reacting in real time. What do you make of that versus how we do it?
I find it very intimidating, and I do. But I also, well, because I'm the straight A student, the perfectionist, all of that. So the idea of just going in and like winging it and going through going with the flow and wherever the conversation leads for 12 hours, I find that extremely intimidating. It also makes me feel kind of old because I don't really understand it. You know what I mean? I'm like, I see it in all the comments scrolling, whatever. I'm like, this is not my world. But the one thing I do relate to is, the one thing I miss about the time that I was at MSNBC is doing breaking news. So when a big story broke, and I don't think it's exactly the same, but it's that similar, like you're being fed information into your ear, you're looking on your computer, it's all happening right then and there. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. You're getting in a guest, you're trying to figure out your questions, all of that stuff. Actually really, even though it was a huge adrenaline hit, and that was a little scary and intimidating, especially at first. I also really enjoyed doing that kind of work where the stakes were relatively high and you're just figuring it out in the flow as you go. So I can kind of relate to the appeal of it in that way.
Yeah, you think it's intimidating, but when you're actually doing it, it's not, because I do live streams a decent amount, and what happens is you're even more in the moment when you're doing it live. Like you and I right now, we're in the moment, but if we were to be doing this live with comments and reacting to the comments, you're actually even more in the moment. And you'd be surprised. Some people have the ability to just sort of snap into place and kind of tune in to a certain frequency for the live things. And it makes it fun, and it makes it so I always feel like I'm even less likely to mess up when it's live and you're engaging in real time. You know what I mean? Like I think there's even more room to mess up when you're pre-recording something. You know, there were times where I pre-recorded YouTube videos as a matter of procedure. I didn't do it that much, but because most of the time I'm live in one sense or another, and like that's when my perfectionism comes out more. That's when I'm like, I messed that up. Let me start that over. But when you're live, you're forced. Like this is it. There's no second takes. There's no nothing. You better fucking nail it. And then it makes it so that you do. You sort of tap into this mindset where you do. And the other thing is for him in particular, streaming that many hours, even though for what you and I do, there's more preparation involved. Like there's probably more reading of articles and more watching of clips and stuff before you go on air. He ultimately is doing more work because when you're 10 to 12 hours, you're talking, that's insane.
So much. That is so much. No, even just the difference between, some cable news shows are pre-taped and some are live. And they call them, live to tape, which means you're supposed to be doing it as if it's live. But even just somewhere in the back of your head, knowing that it's not technically live right now, it does make a difference in the energy of it and the way that it feels while you're doing it. We did at Rising, we would do live debate coverage and we did live like election night coverage. And yeah, it's exhausting and it's also exhilarating. And so I do actually really enjoy it. It's the kind of thing that I just find it, I mean, it's a little bit more like, the high wire act. Like it's a little higher risk, but it's also, I think, sort of higher reward because you do get that, like, I don't know, there's a rush to it for sure that you don't get in pre-recorded things, I guess I would say. So I do get the appeal of it that way.
What did you make of the Sagar criticism?
So I think part of it is somewhat fair, and I think part of it's unfair because I think Sagar gets lumped in by people who haven't watched the show a lot. I think he gets lumped in with like Trump apologists, and so the idea that he is one of these people who's covering lab leak or cares about it because he wants to distract from Trump's failures, that's just not true at all. And he was extremely critical of Trump's handling of coronavirus, didn't hesitate to talk about that, and also tries to make it clear that this was not a bioweapon and it was not intentionally released by China, and makes it frequently clear that there are a lot of right-wing actors that are using this for nefarious purposes and that he doesn't want any part of that. But I think the point about his interest in China, I can understand definitely why that's read as oh, you want a new Cold War, or you're hawkish, or why are you focusing so much on this country? So I think that part I understand the critique of, but I also disagree. I disagree with the idea too that if the pandemic did start from gain of function research, that we should just keep doing that research and not ask any questions about that, because in my view, actually, based on what I've read, we already know enough about the risk of gain and function research to be pumping the brakes at the very least. And instead, we're going the exact opposite direction. So the scientific community is, certainly better than Trump world, but they have their own interests and ambitions and blind spots as well. So if their career is dependent on getting these research grants and pursuing this type of research, they're going to be biased in favor of continuing it, whether or not it's actually the right thing to do. So I don't buy into the notion that just defer to the scientists. We can't ask any questions of them. I don't think that's the right way to look at this at all.
Well, yeah, and ethics in science is its own thing. It's a whole field, you debate whether or not something is moral or ethical or reasonable to even study. And there's plenty of examples of unethical experiments, for example, like the Stanford prison experiment is viewed as or the Zimbardo experiment. That's viewed as oh, that was unethical and should have never been done. In the same way that, you need people's consent and you shouldn't study certain things. You shouldn't try to just clone a human. You know what I mean? it's its own philosophical field, and to think like, well, if the scientists want to do it, let's just do it. No, that makes no sense. Like, because you can, with no guidelines, no rules, no things that are viewed as okay and not okay, it's chaos. They'll study everything, and they're, like I said, the nuclear weapon came about because we were messing around, and studying and science, and look what we could do. We could destroy the entire planet. Isn't this wonderful? So I agree with you on that, and I would get rid of gain of function research, no doubt about it.
I guess the other thing I would just say on the Sagar piece is this is always very uncomfortable for me. Like, he should be here defending himself.
I know. I wanted to give you a chance to respond, though, because you could monologue here as opposed to having somebody.
Well, and the thing is, like, I don't want to monologue on because he, has his perspective, and I don't always agree with his perspective. That's part of what I think makes our show interesting is, like, we're not ideologically the same, and we do have points of disagreement. So I always just feel put in a very weird place where, like, I want to defend him because he's my partner and I know that he operates in good faith and I know where he's coming from. But I also, like, don't agree with certain areas. So it's just, like, I think it's sort of unfair both to Sagar and to me to, to have that whole conversation and him not be here to articulate what he actually thinks on the issue,
Well, first of all, I totally understand what you're saying, but in order to discuss the topic of the lab leak, and we wanted to ask Hasan about that because he's criticized you guys on that, we had to bring it up. There was no way around it.
Of course, Well, and I mean, I'm the one that brought it up, right?
That's what I'm saying, right? Yeah.
Right, and I think maybe I didn't actually watch what he said originally about us, and I don't know if he only criticized Sagar or criticized me as well. So, maybe I should have just not asked about it. But it feels like when someone, and he just said, if he had said it like a month or two in the past or whatever, I'd probably been like, whatever. But it was just something he talked about this week. So I sort of felt like it'd be weird if I didn't bring it up, Yeah,
I mean, listen, it's a totally reasonable conversation to have. It's an interesting issue. But as you correctly pointed out, you're in a weird position simply because your show includes Sagar. So if he's criticizing you guys and some or most of the criticism is directed at Sagar, it's like you want to get into what the disagreement is, and you can't get into the disagreement without him being like, well, I disagreed more with Sagar than I did with you. You know what I mean? So it's like he inevitably was going to come up if we were going to talk about the issue, and we had no choice but to really talk about the issue. So there's no way around that. But in terms of it, from my perspective, I'm more comfortable talking about him. I don't do a show with him, so I'm more comfortable talking about him. I know him. He's a nice guy. Not in a million years would I question his sincerity. I think he's incredibly good faith. I think he's completely sincere in every respect. And there's nothing I would say here that I wouldn't say to his face as well. So I think there is a difference between pre-January 6th Sagar and post-January 6th Sagar. I think that, and he says this himself. He said it, when we helped launch Breaking Points on Krystal, Kyle, and Friends. He was like, yeah, there was a time where maybe I felt like I have to give the populist right position. And then when I saw the Stop the Steal stuff, I was like, oh, these people are idiots and I want nothing to do with them. So there has been like an evolution and a growth in Sagar. And when people criticize him, sometimes I don't think they realize that like he's changed a lot over the years. And so you can blatantly criticize him.
The Tucker thing's a perfect example. I mean, Tucker gave him his first job, right? And I think he's felt a lot of loyalty to him, like just on a human level over that, which is, an understandable kind of a thing. But there, too, there's been a very different sort of tone and rhetoric and just unvarnished opinion in recent months. And I think you're right that I don't think he'd track it to January 6th. I think he'd track it to Stop the Steal in general, because he knew right away that was going to be.
That's what I meant. I don't know why I said January 6th.
Well, I mean, they're of a piece, right? I mean, that leads to January 6th, whatever. But Stop the Steal was really the breaking point for him, where it's like, I no longer feel like I need to cover for any of these people at all. And so I do feel like some of the criticism of him doesn't reflect that growth. And I think also the other thing that bothers me is, just like we talked about, there's this obsession on the left with like, let me find everything Joe Rogan says that I hate and let me focus only on that. That's the other thing that is done with us. So he can agree with us on like 80% of stuff, no one talks about that. And then it's like, oh, but on this one thing, I didn't like what you said, or you didn't criticize this person enough, or that person, or whatever. And there's more of an emphasis and a fixation on those points than on like, oh, wow, we've got, all these areas on healthcare and economics and various things that we actually do have common ground on.
Yeah. But to be fair, that is your show with him. You guys are most of the time talking about the stuff you agree with each other on. So, like, there is a very prominent, very popular space where you're doing exactly that. So
yeah,
it's not,
no,
I don't
that's
think
true.
it's weird when people are like, hey, this thing he said here about lab leak. Because listen, from my perspective, yes, they're like, when he talks about China, like every day, I'm like, I don't know why you're talking about China every day. And even from the perspective like, oh, it's just about jobs and outsourcing, I talk about it all the time too. But I talk about it from the perspective of the shit we can control in the United States, which is we should stop outsourcing our fucking jobs. You know, it's not a story about China as much as it's a story about corporations have bought the government and they wanted to outsource all the fucking jobs.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So listen, there are criticisms of him that I have. There's criticisms that others have. But overall, yes, you're correct. In the same spirit of the Joe Rogan monologue that you did, the breaking points that you gave, where you're like, I don't understand why people don't focus on the areas where he says all the reasonable shit. Yeah, I think that's fair about Sagar too. He does get a bad rap on the left in many respects, when really, as far as like somebody who you can work with goes, he's the best you're ever going to get for somebody who nominally is ideologically not in alignment with you. I know he now rejects like populist right label, and he said he's like, what do you say? Radical centrist? Disgusting. Like, never say those words again. But as far as somebody who ideologically is not in alignment with us, yes, if he's going to agree on unions and minimum wage and getting money out of politics or blah, 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 it's like, well, that's as good as it can ever get, you know?
Yeah, and it does create that pathway for some people who don't agree with us on those issues, who do consider themselves on the right, to maybe come over and have a different perspective on those issues, or to not just like think that socialists are uniquely evil threat to the world or whatever. So anyway, I always find, again, I brought it up, so it's my own fault, but I felt like it was something that we should agree. But I do find those conversations when he's not here to articulate his own perspective very uncomfortable, because, again, there are areas where I also have critiques and disagreements with Sagar, but then I feel like I'm put in the position of, you need to defend him in these areas. So anyway, that was my feeling about all of that.
Well, to sum it up as simply as possible, you 100% defend his sincerity, his honesty, how good faith he is, and him as a person. In terms of the substance of what he says, you have to go case by case and say,
that's absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it's as
on
simple
these
as
areas we agree, on these areas we don't agree. But is he operating in good faith? Is he like some, I mean, the really ridiculous criticism is always that like a fascist, he's basically Hitler, all this. I mean,
oh, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Yeah, that's
so
just
incredibly silly.
Idiot.
Right.
If you believe
so
that,
incredibly
one of the
silly.
dumbest people. Populist right? Pfft, Nazis were populist right, and this guy's populist right is fucking Nazis, like Goebbels or Hitler. You have a 6 IQ. Please shut the fuck up.
Yes.
Anyway.
Exactly. But I very much enjoyed talking to Hasan, who I think is a really interesting guy, really interesting thinker, and obviously has this platform that is extraordinarily powerful and that he is using in a very intentional way, which I think was interesting to hear from him on too.
Yeah, and he is, I'm going to dub him the king of the Zoomers, because I do believe that as young as my audience is and as young as your audience is, it's mostly millennial. And I think he probably is also attracted, because Twitch probably in general too is on average a younger platform as well.
I think
so he's the king of the Zoomers.
I would think so. Yeah.
True. I have no facts to back it up. I'm talking out of my asshole, but I'm probably correct. That's secular talk summed up, and Krystal, Kyle, and friends summed up in one. Talking out of my asshole, but probably correct. That's my life. My life summed
That's
up
your
on a
motto.
bumper sticker. Yeah. So, guys, just to let everybody know, if this is your first time listening to the show or not, Krystal and I have decided we're taking $0 from all advertisers. I mean, we turn the ads off even on YouTube. We turn the ads off when it comes to podcasts. If we wanted to, we could read ads and people would throw money at our faces at 1,000 miles an hour for us to read ads, because, in terms of the numbers, the podcast does pretty well. We decided we wanted to build something a little more pure. We decided we wanted to build something totally disconnected from all that nonsense. And so basically the way that we fund this show is through memberships effectively. It's really a tip. So basically you pay $5 a month and then you get the video of the interviews and you get it a day early. So the podcast will always be totally free for everybody in audio format. That comes out on all the podcast platforms. But either way, sign up on Substack, either for the $5 for the video or for free to get the podcast delivered via email the second it drops. But if you support the show, please consider paying the $5 a month and getting the video a day early. Again, if not, it's okay. You can get it for free a day later. So you get it a day later in an audio format for free. But we'd really appreciate it if you helped out because, when we did this, we were like, let's make something a little more pure. And we knew going into it, we're only going to make like 25% or 50% of what we could make on the podcast, but it was never really about the money. And we wanted to try out something that, I think honestly, Krystal, and I'm not trying to speak ill of anybody else in our field, I think we're the only people who are doing it where we literally take no other money from any other outlet. Even my show, Secular Talk, I've never had a conversation with an advertiser ever. I'm very proud of that. But I still allow the YouTube ads to run because I don't talk to any advertisers that way. There's a buffer. But this we've gone even further where we literally turned off the YouTube ads. Even for our teaser clips, we turn off the YouTube ads. If anything happens to run, that's just Google putting it there so that they make the money from it. So, we wanted to build something more pure. So if you guys, support that and support the show and like the interviews, please help us out on Substack, $5 a month. And I don't think you'll regret it. We have had a lot of wonderful guests, and it's much better to see the lovely Krystal Ball instead of just hear her.
Stop. You always say that, but I do appreciate it. And I know a lot of your fans want to see your beautiful face as well. For you guys who have subscribed, by the way, you can sign up on Substack and not pay the $5 a month, and then you get all the newsletters and you get it in your inbox there in terms of the audio version on Saturday. It's something we always fail to mention, that you can sign up on Substack and then choose whether you're going to pay the $5 a month or not and get the video version. For those of you who have subscribed, I just want you to know how much we appreciate you. Like, it really does mean a lot. And we know for a lot of you, like, money may be tight. There's a lot of different content out there. There's a lot of different Patreons, a lot of different Substacks, all that. So we're extremely grateful to you guys. Appreciate you.
Yeah, and thank you to Piker for the phenomenal newsletter. She does a great job behind the scenes, and people might not know about how much work goes into it and how much she does for us. So big thank you to Piper as well.
Indeed.
All right, guys, we love you, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys.